For 6 months, I thought my body was simply giving up. The doctors ran every test, ran up my bills, and told me it was just old age catching up. I believed them until the morning my neighbor grabbed the mahogany tea box my son gave me and said, "Do not touch that. What he put inside will destroy you." I was furious. I told him it was a birthday gift from my only child. But my neighbor lowered his voice and told me to look closer at the bottom of the box. He said if I did nothing, would ever be the same again. My name is Randall Pierce. I am 69 years old and a proud business owner in Atlanta. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your legacy from the people you trusted most. The nausea hit me the moment my feet touched the cold hardwood floor of my bedroom. It was a vicious churning in my gut that sent me sprinting to the bathroom. Yet here she was humming a cheerful tune while boiling water and eagerly reaching for the mahogany box. I watched her from my chair. Her perfectly manicured fingernails scooped the lethal powder into a mug. She was not making me a comforting beverage. She was preparing my daily dose of poison. She brought the steaming cup to the living room and placed it gently in my hands. "Drink up, Randall," she said softly, watching me with a predatory intensity. "It will make you feel so much better." The sheer evil of her performance was mesmerizing. I raised the mug to my lips, letting the hot steam warm my face. I took a shallow breath and immediately feigned a violent coughing fit. I bent over, clutching my chest, coughing so hard my shoulders shook. As they momentarily recoiled in fake concern, I swiftly tipped the hot liquid into the large potted fern right beside my armchair. I let out a ragged groan, placed the empty-looking mug on the side table, and leaned back, squeezing my eyes shut. Tyson remained frozen on his knees for a few agonizing seconds, absorbing the brutal weight of his wife's betrayal. The woman he had lied for, stolen for, and attempted to murder his own father for was now loudly begging the FBI to lock him away forever. Something inside Tyson completely snapped. The shock and fear paralyzing his body instantly mutated into an explosive, blinding rage. He let out a raw, guttural roar that sounded more beast than human. Defying the federal agents surrounding him, Tyson violently launched himself off the marble floor. He tackled Megan with the sheer kinetic force of a cornered predator. The sudden explosive movement caught the arresting agents completely off guard. Tyson and Megan crashed hard onto the floor, sliding against the polished marble. Tyson pinned her down, his hands desperately wrapping around her throat despite being hindered by the heavy steel cuffs secured behind his back. "You treacherous, lying snake," Tyson screamed, spit flying from his mouth as his face twisted into a mask of pure, murderous fury. "You pushed me into this. You hated him. You hated his house, and you hated his money. You are the one who ordered the poison. You are the one who paid $10,000 to that fake doctor to declare him insane. You wanted to lock him in a cage. You told me to sell the building. You planned every single detail." Megan gasped and choked, thrashing wildly beneath him, trying to kick him off. She shrieked for help as Tyson drove his weight down harder, consumed by total madness. He was no longer trying to escape the federal agents. He just wanted to destroy the woman who had orchestrated his downfall and then abandoned him at the finish line. Agent Miller shouted a sharp tactical command, breaking through the chaos. Two heavily armed agents lunged forward, struggling to rip Tyson off his wife. Tyson kicked and thrashed, fighting with the terrifying strength of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Back away right now," Agent Miller roared, drawing a bright yellow taser from his tactical belt. Tyson ignored the command, completely blinded by his rage, still trying to crush Megan against the floor. Agent Miller did not hesitate. He aimed the device directly at the center of Tyson's back and pulled the trigger. The loud, sharp crack of the taser discharging filled the room. Two barbed probes slammed into Tyson's expensive suit, delivering 50,000 volts of electricity straight into his muscular system. Tyson's body instantly locked up, his back arched violently, his eyes rolling back in his head as he let out a choked, agonizing groan. The federal agent swiftly pulled him off Megan, throwing him flat onto his stomach and driving a heavy knee into his spine to keep him completely subdued. Megan scrambled backward across the marble floor, coughing and sobbing hysterically, her pristine white dress now torn and ruined. I stood silently near the head of the mahogany table, watching the chaotic, pathetic destruction of the two people who had tried to erase my existence. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I adjusted my suit jacket and walked slowly around the table, my hard leather shoes echoing sharply against the marble. I approached Tyson, who was now lying flat on his stomach, twitching and gasping for air as the residual electrical current coursed through his nervous system. Two federal agents maintained a firm grip on his shoulders, keeping him pinned to the ground. I stopped right next to his head, looking down at the son who had traded his soul for a real estate payout. I leaned forward, getting close enough so only he could hear my voice over the shouting and confusion in the boardroom. My tone was freezing cold, completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "I never drank a single drop of that herbal tea you gifted me, Tyson," I whispered, staring into his terrified, panicked eyes. "I poured every bit of it into the dirt. But this bitter cup you brewed today, you are going to drink every last drop of it." I straightened my posture, turned my back on him, and began walking toward the shattered boardroom doors, leaving him to face the devastating reality of his choices. I walked out of the towering glass headquarters, leaving the chaos of the 40th floor far behind me. By the time my polished leather shoes hit the pavement outside, the scene had completely erupted. A fleet of federal vehicles and local police cruisers had barricaded the entire city block. Yellow crime scene tape was being unspooled across the pristine revolving glass doors of Apex Development, sealing the corrupt empire from the public. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly spectacular. It did not take long for the local news vans to arrive, their massive satellite antennas extending toward the Atlanta sky. Within an hour, the story had broken out of the local market and exploded across every major national television network. Breaking news banners flashed across millions of screens detailing the massive federal raid on one of the country's most powerful real estate conglomerates. The pristine reputation of Richard Vance and his billionaire syndicate was disintegrating on live television. The reporters detailed the shocking allegations of extortion, predatory fraud, and an attempted assassination of a local black business owner. The fortress of glass and steel that had terrorized my community for years was now officially an active federal crime scene. The corporate bloodbath was unprecedented. The moment Wall Street caught wind of the federal indictments and the chief executive officer being marched out in handcuffs, the financial markets reacted with absolute brutal efficiency. The Apex Development stock plummeted into a catastrophic freefall. Institutional investors panicked, dumping their shares by the millions. In a single afternoon, billions of dollars in corporate valuations simply evaporated into thin air. The mighty conglomerate that had bullied working-class families and bulldozed historic neighborhoods was bleeding out on the trading floor, its financial life support completely severed. I watched the stock ticker on the television in Mr. Cohen's office, feeling a profound sense of poetic justice. But the war was not entirely over. While the federal government was busy dismantling Richard Vance and his criminal enterprise, Mr. Cohen was preparing to drop the final devastating hammer on my son and daughter-in-law. The criminal charges of attempted murder and federal wire fraud were already locked in, ensuring they would spend decades behind bars. However, Mr. Cohen wanted to ensure that their financial ruin was as absolute and thorough as their physical incarceration. He opened his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of legal filings. "Randall," he said, adjusting his silver-framed glasses, "we are not just going to let the justice system take their freedom. We are going to legally strip them of every single cent they possess." Cohen activated the final phase of our financial retaliation. He formally filed a massive civil lawsuit against Tyson and Megan, demanding full restitution for the $80,000 stolen from my secondary credit line, punitive damages for severe emotional distress, and comprehensive legal fees. This civil suit was the lethal finishing blow. Mr. Cohen filed the emergency motions directly with a superior court judge, specifically citing the flight risk and the irrefutable evidence of ongoing financial fraud. The judge moved with unprecedented speed, completely appalled by the depth of their depravity. He immediately granted our motions for preliminary injunctions and attachments. The court authorized an immediate hard freeze on all bank accounts holding Tyson and Megan's names. Their checking accounts, their meager savings, and even their retirement funds were instantly locked by federal order. They were completely financially paralyzed, unable to access a single dollar to buy a meal, let alone hire a competent defense attorney. They had tried to steal my legacy to fund their pathetic illusion of wealth. Now the legal system was going to rip that illusion away from them piece by piece, leaving them with absolutely nothing. The execution of the court order was swift and merciless. While Tyson and Megan were sitting in separate cold federal interrogation rooms, the wheels of financial justice were rolling right up to their doorstep. I rode in the passenger seat of Mr. Cohen's sleek sedan, following a flatbed tow truck to the luxury high-rise condominium complex, where my son and his wife had pretended to be high society elites. We pulled into the pristine brick-paved driveway just in time to witness the glorious spectacle. Parked in the designated premium spot was the gleaming brand-new Mercedes-Benz that Megan had purchased using the funds stolen from my late wife's memorial scholarship account. Two men in heavy work boots secured thick steel chains to the undercarriage of the luxury vehicle. The loud mechanical whine of the winch echoed through the upscale parking lot as the expensive car was dragged onto the flatbed. "Oh, my chest!" I gasped, letting my hands shake visibly against my knees. "I feel so weak today. The tea just will not stay down. My heart feels like it is skipping beats." The sudden performance worked perfectly. Tyson rushed forward, but his eyes did not dart to my face. He looked straight at the heavy leather briefcase he had left by the sofa. "Dad, you are clearly getting worse," Tyson said, his tone shifting instantly from fake concern to urgent business. "The stress of managing the commercial building is too much for you in this condition. You need to focus entirely on resting." He snapped open his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. He placed a sleek silver pen right next to my trembling hand on the armrest. "This is a power of attorney," he explained smoothly, tapping a line at the bottom of the last page. "It just allows me to handle the tenants, collect the rent, and manage the administrative headaches for you." Several affluent neighbors stepped out onto their balconies, pointing and whispering as the ultimate symbol of Megan's fake status was unceremoniously hauled away to an impound lot to be liquidated. But the car was only the beginning. The $80,000 in fraudulent credit card debt had triggered an immediate aggressive response from the central bank. Because Tyson had leveraged their condominium as collateral for his underground gambling debts and subsequent desperate loans, the bank executed an immediate seizure of the property to cover the staggering deficit. A team of court-appointed bailiffs marched into the luxurious lobby armed with heavy bolt cutters and official eviction notices. They bypassed the stunned concierge and went straight to the penthouse suite. Within minutes, the heavy brass locks on the customized front door were completely changed. Bright orange legal notices were plastered across the polished wood, officially declaring the property seized by the bank. Every piece of expensive designer furniture, every silk dress in Megan's massive walk-in closet, and every single piece of artwork they had purchased to project their fake wealth was now locked away entirely out of their reach. They had literally gambled away their entire lives trying to steal mine. The irony was incredibly sharp. Megan had spent years turning her nose up at my historic neighborhood, acting as if my working-class roots were a disease. She believed she belonged in a penthouse surrounded by imported leather and crystal chandeliers. Now she did not even own the clothes on her back. Her entire identity was tied to material possessions that had been acquired through theft and deception. Watching the tow truck pull out of the complex carrying that stolen vehicle away, I felt the last lingering shadow of betrayal lift from my shoulders. The meticulous trap I had set had worked perfectly. They were stripped bare, stripped of their money, their home, and their dignity. The total obliteration of their false reality culminated later that afternoon outside the federal courthouse. I stood quietly near the back of the massive crowd that had gathered. The media presence had multiplied exponentially. Dozens of news vans lined the street, their bright camera flashes lighting up the overcast Atlanta afternoon. The heavy metal side doors of the federal building swung open. Federal marshals escorted Megan out into the harsh, blinding light of the public eye. She was no longer wearing her pristine white silk or her designer heels. She was dressed in a cheap, drab prison jumpsuit, her wrists heavily shackled in front of her waist. Her hair was a tangled, messy knot, and her face was streaked with ruined makeup and tears. The reporters surged forward, shouting rapid-fire questions about the assassination plot and the corporate extortion ring. The camera shutters clicked furiously, capturing her utter disgrace from every possible angle. She tried to hide her face behind her bound hands, cowering from the unforgiving lenses. The arrogant, entitled woman who thought she could murder me and steal my legacy was now enduring the ultimate public humiliation, stripped of every single ounce of her illusory honor. 6 months passed since that spectacular downfall on the courthouse steps. The sprawling federal district court in downtown Atlanta was a monument to absolute solemnity. The heavy oak-paneled walls and high vaulted ceilings created a suffocating atmosphere, suffocating for the guilty at least. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Mr. Cohen and Arthur Abernathy, my posture straight and my expression carved from granite. Across the room, sitting at the defense tables, were the two people who had conspired to end my life. Tyson and Megan were entirely unrecognizable. The arrogant swagger, the designer silk dresses, The expensive haircuts, all of it had been completely stripped away by 6 months in federal lockup. They wore baggy, faded orange prison jumpsuits that hung loosely off their shrinking frames. Tyson looked hollowed out, his shoulders slumped, his eyes staring blankly at the polished wooden table in front of him. Megan looked like she had aged 10 years, her face pale, gaunt, and devoid of any makeup or synthetic confidence. The reality of their choices had physically deteriorated them. They looked like exactly what they were, broken inmates awaiting the final drop of the gavel. The air in the courtroom was tense enough to snap as the federal judge called the sentencing hearing to order. The trial itself had been swift and brutal. The mountain of digital evidence, the hidden camera footage, the financial wire transfers, and the explicit audio recordings had left the defense team with absolutely zero room to maneuver. They had lost the trial unequivocally. Today was strictly about sentencing, and Tyson's high-priced defense attorney was desperate to save his client from spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. The lawyer stood up, adjusting his expensive tie, and walked slowly toward the jury box, attempting to deploy the most despicable legal tactic imaginable. He tried to turn the predator into the victim. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the defense attorney began, his voice dripping with fabricated sympathy. "What we have here is not a cold-blooded monster, but a desperate, terrified man who was pushed beyond the brink of human endurance." He paced back and forth, weaving a pathetic narrative of psychological pressure. He painted a picture of Tyson drowning in insurmountable underground gambling debts, stalked by violent loan sharks who threatened to break his legs and harm his wife. He tried to frame the entire assassination plot as a tragic consequence of immense financial stress and severe generational conflict. He dared to suggest that the immense pressure of living up to a highly successful, hard-working father had fractured Tyson's mental state. He told the court that Tyson felt overshadowed by my real estate empire and that his massive debts had created a temporary psychosis. He was a son trying to survive in a ruthless modern economy, the lawyer pleaded, gesturing toward Tyson's slumped figure. He made a horrific, indefensible mistake, but he acted out of primal fear for his life, not out of malice. We are asking for leniency. We are asking you to see the human being underneath the terrible choices, a man who simply broke under the crushing weight of modern financial despair. I listened to this absolute garbage from the gallery, keeping my face perfectly still. It was a masterclass in shifting blame, attempting to excuse premeditated patricide as a simple side effect of bad debt. Tyson kept his head down, playing the role of the remorseful, broken victim perfectly. Megan's attorney tried a similar tactic, claiming she was merely a compliant wife coerced by a terrified husband. It was a sickening display of moral cowardice. They were trying to manipulate the jury's empathy, using their own weakness as a shield against true justice. The judge turned her stern gaze toward the gallery and called me forward to deliver my victim impact statement. I stood up, buttoned my tailored charcoal suit jacket, and walked down the center aisle with slow, deliberate, heavy steps. I did not lean on a cane. I did not shuffle. I walked up to the witness stand, taking the oath with a clear, booming voice that echoed off the high ceilings. I sat down and looked directly at the jury box. I did not shed a single tear. There was no weakness in my eyes, no trembling in my hands. I was a man who had stared death in the face and walked away completely victorious. "I am not here to ask for your pity," I began, my voice projecting with raw, unyielding authority. "I am here to tell you the truth about pressure and the truth about greed. The defense wants you to believe my son was driven to attempted murder by the stress of financial debt." I looked directly at Tyson, forcing him to lift his head and meet my gaze. I know exactly what financial pressure looks like. I grew up in an era where the system was built specifically to keep men like me in the dirt. I worked 14-hour shifts, laying bricks in the blistering Georgia heat, my hands bleeding, my back aching, just to put food on the table and clothes on that boy's back. I swallowed my pride, I endured the prejudice of this world, and I sacrificed every personal comfort so my son would never have to know the true meaning of desperation. I built a legacy from nothing, relying on sweat discipline and an unbreakable moral compass. I pointed a steady finger at the defense table. What sits before you today is not desperation. It is sheer, unadulterated entitlement. Tyson did not try to kill me because he was scared. He tried to kill me because he was lazy. He and his wife wanted the millions of dollars I bled for, but they did not want to do a single day of honest work to earn it. They did not just want my money. They wanted to strip me of my dignity. They fed me heavy metal toxins disguised as a birthday gift. They hired a corrupt doctor to declare me legally insane, aiming to lock me in a psychiatric ward so they could parade around in luxury cars bought with funds meant to honor my dead wife. They trampled on the sacrifices of the generation that paved the way for them. They conspired with ruthless corporate developers to bulldoze our historic community, selling out their own heritage for a quick payout. They traded their souls for a real estate contract. That is not a mistake driven by fear. That is pure, calculated evil. I stopped speaking, and the silence that followed was absolute and heavy. I will take care of the taxes and the property maintenance. Just sign here, Dad. Let me take the burden off your shoulders so you can recover. I stared at the document. It was a comprehensive transfer of financial authority. If I signed that paper, Tyson could legally sell my multi-million-dollar property before the sun went down. He was not trying to ease my burden. He was trying to secure his inheritance before the thallium finished me off. He needed the legal right to sell my life's work. I looked up at my son, searching his face for any shred of the little boy who used to beg me to read him bedtime stories. There was nothing left. Only a greedy, desperate man trying to rob a corpse. I let my hand shake violently as I reached for the pen, purposely knocking it onto the wooden floor. I let out a long, exhausted sigh. I cannot even hold the pen today, Tyson. My fingers are completely numb. My vision is too blurry to read a single word on that page. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit working overtime. I held the gaze of every single juror, making sure they understood the profound gravity of the betrayal. I stepped down from the witness stand and walked calmly back to my seat next to Mr. Cohen without looking at the defense table again. I did not need to. The atmosphere in the federal courtroom had completely shifted. The defense attorney's pathetic narrative of a pressured, struggling son had been entirely incinerated by the brutal, searing heat of the truth. I watched the faces of the 12 men and women sitting in the jury box. Their expressions had hardened into stone. They were no longer looking at Tyson and Megan with any shred of human empathy or understanding. The pity the defense had tried so desperately to manufacture was completely gone. The jurors looked at the defense table, and they did not see a struggling couple caught in a bad situation. They saw exactly what Tyson and Megan truly were. Cold-blooded, ruthless monsters who were willing to execute their own flesh and blood for a paycheck. The Honorable Judge Harrison picked up her heavy wooden gavel and brought it down with a sharp, resounding crack that echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous courtroom. The sound instantly sliced through the low murmurs of the gallery, demanding absolute, suffocating silence. You could hear a pin drop on the polished hardwood floor. The 12 members of the jury had returned from their deliberations in record time, their faces grim and resolute, signaling that they had not struggled with their decision. The bailiff instructed the defendants to rise. Tyson and Megan stood up on trembling legs, their faded orange prison jumpsuits looking even more pathetic under the harsh fluorescent lights of federal justice. Their high-priced defense attorney stood beside them, looking defeated before a single word was even spoken. I remained seated next to Mr. Cohen, my hands resting calmly on my lap, my heart beating with a steady, unshakable rhythm. I watched the judge open the sealed folder containing their fate. The air in the room was so thick with anticipation it felt almost solid. This was the moment of ultimate reckoning, the exact second where their elaborate web of lies, poison, and corporate extortion would finally collapse into dust. Judge Harrison did not mince her words. She looked directly at the defense table with a gaze that could melt steel. The jury finds the defendant, Tyson Pierce, guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, federal wire fraud, and elder abuse. She read, her voice booming with unwavering authority. Tyson swayed on his feet as if he had been physically struck. The judge continued staring him down. This court has seen many cases of financial desperation, but the sheer calculated malice required to slowly poison your own father for a real estate payout defies all human comprehension. For your horrific crimes, I sentence you to 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Tyson let out a choked, agonizing gasp, his knees buckling slightly as the federal marshals grabbed his arms to keep him upright. 25 years. His life was officially over. He would enter prison as a young man and leave as a broken, elderly ghost, stripped of everything he had ever valued. The judge then turned her terrifying gaze toward Megan, who was already sobbing uncontrollably into her bound hands. "And you, Megan Pierce, the judge stated coldly. You not only supplied the lethal toxin, but you actively orchestrated a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation to strip a vulnerable man of his basic human rights. You are a danger to society. I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison. Megan let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, her legs giving out completely as she collapsed into her chair. The judge was not finished. Dr. Eris Thorne, the corrupt psychiatrist who had sold his medical license for a $10,000 bribe, was standing at a separate defense table, sweating profusely. For medical malpractice, perjury, and conspiracy to commit fraud, the judge sentenced him to 10 mandatory years behind bars. The hammer of justice had fallen, crushing every single one of them. There would be no appeals, no leniency, and absolutely no hope for escape. The empire of lies they had built had been completely eradicated by the harsh, uncompromising light of the law. As the bailiffs moved in to physically restrain the defendants and escort them back to their holding cells, complete panic overtook my son. Tyson violently shoved his defense attorney aside and threw his entire body weight forward. He crashed hard onto his knees right in the middle of the courtroom floor, his heavy metal shackles clanking loudly against the wood. Dad, he screamed, his voice tearing through the silent room with raw, animalistic desperation. Dad, please. I am so sorry. I was out of my mind. Please, you have to forgive me. Give me one more chance. I can be a better son. Do not let them lock me in a cage for the rest of my life. Dad, look at me. The federal marshals immediately lunged forward to drag him up by his armpits, but he fought them, dragging his knees across the floor, reaching his bound hands out toward the gallery where I was sitting. Tears and snot streamed down his face, completely destroying whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. He was begging for mercy from the exact same man he had watched consume poison just a few months prior. I slowly stood up from my seat. The entire courtroom watched in absolute silence, waiting to see if a father's heart would finally break at the sight of his weeping son. I walked toward the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the courtroom floor. I looked down at Tyson. My expression was completely empty, devoid of anger, devoid of sadness, and absolutely devoid of pity. I did not see my son kneeling there. I only saw a stranger, a dangerous predator who had tried to steal my life. I did not say a single word. There was nothing left to say. I held his desperate, tear-filled gaze for 3 long seconds, ensuring he saw the absolute void where my love for him used to reside. Then, with deliberate, slow precision, I turned my back to him. I adjusted my tailored suit jacket, squared my shoulders, and began walking toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. Tyson's agonizing screams echoed behind me, begging me to come back, begging me to look at him just one more time. I did not turn around. I walked with the proud, unbroken posture of a man who had successfully defended his life, his legacy, and his honor. I walked out of that courtroom a completely free man, leaving him to rot in the hell of his own making. I stepped out into the wide, brightly lit corridor of the federal courthouse, taking a deep, cleansing breath of air. Mr. Cohen followed closely behind me, carrying his sleek silver briefcase. Just outside the courtroom doors, we encountered Megan's high-priced defense attorney, a slick man who looked thoroughly exhausted and utterly defeated by the brutal sentencing. He was packing his files, shaking his head at the catastrophic loss. Mr. Cohen stopped right in front of him, a sharp, calculating smile playing on his lips. Cohen opened his briefcase and pulled out a crisp, heavy parchment paper. It was a certified copy of the exact document Tyson had forced my thumbprint onto in the intensive care unit. Cohen handed the paper to Megan's bewildered lawyer. "Do me a favor and give this to your client when you visit her in federal lockup," Cohen said, his voice dripping with triumphant satisfaction. "She has been screaming that she wants her share of the marital assets. Tell her that the $4 million commercial building she tried to murder my client for is gone. Make sure she knows that she personally stood guard and helped her husband sign away every single penny of his inheritance to a charitable scholarship fund. She orchestrated her own absolute bankruptcy." Cohen patted the stunned lawyer on the shoulder, turned around and walked down the hallway with me, leaving behind the ultimate devastating irony. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the federal courthouse and stepped out into the blinding Atlanta sunlight. The humid southern air hit my face, but for the first time in nearly a year, it did not feel suffocating. It felt like pure, absolute freedom. I took a long, deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs completely. The agonizing weight that had been crushing my chest ever since Abernathy first scraped that lethal white powder from the mahogany box was finally gone. The nightmare was officially over. I was no longer a target. I was no longer a victim trapped in my own home waiting for the next dose of poison. I was a survivor who had stared down the darkest depths of human greed and emerged entirely victorious. The justice system had locked the monsters away, and the city was safe from the corporate vultures. I looked down at my hands. They were steady and strong. The fake tremors and the hunched posture I had maintained for months were a thing of the past. I walked down the concrete steps with a renewed, vigorous energy, leaving the ghosts of betrayal behind me in that courtroom. That evening, we gathered at an exclusive private booth in one of the finest steakhouses in downtown Atlanta. This was not a loud, raucous celebration. Tyson exchanged a panicked, frustrated look with Megan. "Dad, it will only take 1 second," he pressured, picking up the pen and pressing it firmly back into my palm. "Please, just a quick signature. You do not even need to read it. I am your son. I have your best interests at heart." I let the pen drop again, letting it roll under the table, and slumped deeper into the armchair. "I need to sleep," I murmured, my voice raspy and frail. "Leave the papers on the coffee table. I will read them tomorrow when my head is clear. I cannot do it right now. Please, just let me rest." I closed my eyes, playing the role of a dying old man perfectly. Megan huffed loudly, losing her sweet facade for a fraction of a second. Tyson gritted his teeth, clearly irritated. He knew that pushing a sick man any further would look too suspicious. They begrudgingly agreed to leave the documents and told me to get some sleep. The moment the front door clicked shut, the frail, dying old man vanished. It was a quiet, profound gathering of men who had stood on the front lines of a brutal, hidden war. Sitting across from me were the 3 men who had quite literally saved my life. Arthur Abernathy raised his glass of aged bourbon, a rare, genuine smile softening his rugged, veteran features. Mr. Cohen sat to my left, impeccably dressed as always, slicing into a prime rib with the same surgical precision he applied to federal law. To my right sat Vaughn, the private investigator, who had operated in the shadows, capturing the evidence that ultimately dismantled a multi-billion-dollar syndicate. I raised my own glass of sparkling water, looking at each of them with profound, unwavering gratitude. We did not share blood, but these men were my true family. They had risked their careers, their reputations, and their safety to protect an old man they barely knew. Abernathy clinked his glass against mine, noting that his military chemistry expertise had never been put to better use than creating that fake coma. Cohen chuckled, recounting the absolute terror on the faces of the Apex executives when the FBI breached the boardroom doors and shattered their corporate illusion. Vaughn remained mostly quiet, but his sharp eyes conveyed a deep, mutual respect. We spent the next 2 hours eating, laughing, and recounting the meticulous steps of our grand deception. We talked about Lorraine and how she would have handled the situation. I knew my beautiful wife would have been horrified by Tyson's actions, but she would have been fiercely proud of the men sitting at this table. The conversation flowed easily, free from the toxic paranoia that had consumed my life for so long. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by men who did not view me as a walking bank account or a burden to be discarded. They viewed me as an equal, a comrade, and a loyal friend. The deep camaraderie in that dimly lit booth was worth vastly more than all the commercial real estate in the state of Georgia. As the waiter cleared our plates, Mr. Cohen pulled a thick leather-bound portfolio from his briefcase and laid it flat on the polished wooden table. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate realization of the trap Tyson had unknowingly triggered in the intensive care unit. The document Tyson had pressed his thumbprint onto had legally transferred my entire estate into a charitable trust. Now it was time to finalize exactly how those massive funds would be distributed and utilized. I pulled a sleek silver pen from my jacket pocket. The contract detailed the total restructuring of my prized commercial building in the heart of the gentrifying district. I was not going to sell it to developers, and I was certainly not going to let it sit empty collecting dust. I was officially converting the entire bottom 2 floors of the sprawling property into a state-of-the-art community facility. I signed my name with bold, decisive strokes, officially incorporating the Lorraine Pierce Youth Support Center. It was a multi-million-dollar investment designed specifically to protect and elevate underprivileged Black youth in Atlanta. The center would feature full educational tutoring programs, advanced computer science labs, mental health counseling clinics, and safe recreational spaces to keep teenagers off the dangerous streets. It was the exact type of resource I wished had been available when I was growing up fighting for scraps in this very city. I looked at my signature on the parchment, feeling a profound sense of purpose wash over my soul, clearing away the last remnants of sorrow. Tyson and Megan had tried to murder me to steal this wealth and spend it on superficial luxury and sports cars. Apex Development had tried to terrorize me to bulldoze this land for a sterile concrete shopping mall. Instead, this property would stand tall as a fortress of hope and opportunity for generations to come. I slid the portfolio back to Mr. Cohen, who nodded with deep professional satisfaction, sealing the documents. Abernathy clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, telling me that Lorraine was undoubtedly smiling down on this exact moment. I knew he was right. My wife had dedicated her entire life to nurturing others, and now her name would be permanently etched into the very foundation of the neighborhood she loved so dearly. We had taken the most vile, poisonous act of greed imaginable and transmuted it into a powerful vehicle for profound generational change. Word of the massive philanthropic donation spread quickly through the city's legal and business circles. By the time I walked out of the steakhouse and stepped onto the busy downtown pavement, a small group of local journalists had gathered on the sidewalk. They had been tipped off about the final disposition of the highly publicized Apex real estate case. Microphones were thrust in my direction and camera flashes illuminated the warm night air. A young reporter stepped forward, her eyes wide with genuine curiosity. "Mr. Pierce," she called out over the chatter of the busy street, "you survived an assassination attempt by your own family and took down a corrupt corporate empire to keep your property. Why are you choosing to give away a multi-million-dollar fortune to the city instead of keeping it to enjoy a lavish retirement?" I stopped walking and turned to face the camera lenses directly. I did not look angry or tired or broken. I looked entirely at peace. I smiled a warm, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Because a legacy is not the money you leave to the ungrateful," I replied, my voice steady and resonant, cutting clearly through the noise of the city. "A legacy is the lives you manage to save." The vibrant hues of the Atlanta sunset bled across the sprawling skyline, painting the towering glass skyscrapers in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. I stood alone on the private rooftop of my commercial building, letting the warm evening breeze wash over my face. The relentless, suffocating humidity of the summer had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, refreshing autumn chill that signaled the dawn of a new season. I walked over to the small outdoor kitchenette I had recently installed and began the meticulous, deliberate process of brewing a fresh cup of coffee. I did not use a fancy automated machine. I used a simple glass French press, taking my time to carefully measure the rich, dark roasted beans. The robust, earthy aroma filled the air completely, overriding the phantom scent of that toxic herbal tea that had once haunted my mornings and nearly ended my life. I poured the steaming black liquid into a heavy ceramic mug, watching the dark vapor rise into the cooling air. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the bold flavor ground me. It was strong, bitter, and absolutely pure. There were no hidden heavy metal powders, no synthetic cardiac compounds, and no lethal secrets lurking at the bottom of my cup. It was just coffee made by my own hands on my own terms. For the first time in what felt like an absolute eternity, I was drinking something that nourished my body instead of slowly dragging me toward a premature grave. I walked over to the edge of the rooftop, resting my calloused hands on the sturdy brick parapet, and looked down at the streets below. The sidewalks of the historic district were alive with vibrant, kinetic energy. I watched young, hopeful entrepreneurs unlocking the doors to their newly leased storefronts, families walking together toward the local independent restaurants, and groups of teenagers gathering safely near the newly renovated entrance of the Lorraine Pierce Youth Support Center on the ground floor. The neighborhood was thriving, pulsating with the exact cultural heartbeat the Apex developers had tried so desperately to bulldoze and silence forever. Looking down at the bustling crowds, I allowed myself to fully reflect on the harrowing journey of the past 12 months. The memories of Tyson and Megan no longer carried the sharp, agonizing sting of betrayal that once threatened to tear my soul apart. The gaping wound they had torn into my chest when I discovered their murderous plot had completely healed over leaving behind a thick, impenetrable scar tissue of profound wisdom and unyielding resilience. I thought about the terrifying nights I spent pretending to be a frail, dying old man, suffocating under the heavy weight of my own son's treacherous greed. I thought about the sheer terror of lying in that intensive care unit, actively orchestrating my own simulated demise just to trap the monsters circling my hospital bed. It felt like a completely different lifetime lived by a completely different man. The suffocating paranoia that once dictated my every waking moment had been entirely washed away, replaced by a profound, unshakable inner peace. The toxic, heavy chains of corrupted family ties had been permanently severed. Tyson was currently sitting in a maximum security federal cell, facing decades of brutal isolation with nothing but the haunting memory of his own catastrophic failure to keep him company. Megan was stripped of her ill-gotten luxury, learning the harsh reality of survival in a women's penitentiary without her designer clothes or stolen credit cards. I sat up straight, my mind sharper than it had been in months. I pulled out my smartphone and opened the application connected to the hidden micro camera I had installed on my front porch just last week. The live video feed loaded instantly. I watched Megan aggressively pull a bottle of alcohol sanitizer from her purse, scrubbing her hands with pure disgust as if touching my mug had contaminated her. Beside her, Tyson was already pacing down the driveway, a cell phone pressed to his ear. His voice came through the camera's audio feed loud and clear. "Yes, it is a delay, but not a big one," Tyson barked into the phone. "The old man is completely incapacitated. He can barely hold a pen. Tell the Apex guys to get the commercial building purchase contract ready. We will have his signature by tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Apex. That was the ruthless real estate conglomerate aggressively buying up properties in my district. The billionaire executives who thought they could buy my life and my land with a cashier check were utterly disgraced, dismantled by the justice system, and facing their own lengthy prison sentences. The immense pain of realizing my only child wanted me dead could have easily broken my spirit. It could have turned me into a bitter, reclusive hermit, completely consumed by hatred and regret. Instead, it had acted as a searing, intense forge, burning away my blind paternal weaknesses and revealing the hardened, indestructible core underneath. I had walked through the dark valley of the shadow of death, and I had not just survived. I had completely redefined the purpose of my existence. I took another deep sip of my black coffee, letting the rich warmth anchor me firmly to the present moment. I am not a victim. I never was, and I never will be. Society is incredibly quick to write off the elderly as obsolete burdens, fragile relics of a bygone era, who simply need to step aside and quietly hand over their hard-earned resources to the next generation. They look at our graying hair, our deliberate steps, and our weathered hands, and they instantly perceive weakness. They assume our minds are slow and our spirits are easily broken by intimidation. Tyson and Megan made that exact fatal miscalculation. They looked at a 69-year-old black man who had spent 4 relentless decades laying bricks, fighting systemic redlining, and clawing his way up from absolute poverty, and they saw an easy mark. They forgot that the very foundation of my existence was built on surviving harsh environments explicitly designed to destroy me. I am a warrior. My entire life has been a relentless, brutal battlefield to secure a shred of dignity and respect in a world that constantly tried to deny me both. Every single dollar I earned, every piece of property I acquired was paid for in blood, sweat, and agonizing physical labor. Did they really think I was going to let a spoiled, entitled son and a greedy, ruthless daughter-in-law steal the culmination of my life's work just because they slipped some poison into a wooden tea box? Did they honestly believe I would surrender the legacy I built for Lorraine to a pack of corporate vultures without launching a catastrophic tactical counteroffensive? The sheer arrogant audacity of their assumptions is what ultimately sealed their doom. They mistook my paternal patience for senile compliance. I did not just defeat them in a federal courtroom. I dismantled their entire reality from the inside out. I took their lies, their forged documents, and their lethal injections, and I forged them into a weapon of absolute destruction. I protected my honor. I protected my community from being erased by gentrification. And most importantly, I protected the sacred memory of the woman who stood by my side when we had absolutely nothing to our names. The wealth I accumulated is no longer a target painted on my back for greedy relatives to aim at. It is a powerful shield protecting the vulnerable youth of this city, ensuring they have the resources and opportunities I had to bleed for. I am standing on top of my own mountain looking out over my kingdom, and the air has never tasted sweeter. I finished the last drop of my coffee and set the heavy ceramic mug down firmly on the brick ledge. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting a long, magnificent shadow across the bustling, illuminated streets of Atlanta. The city lights began to flicker on a constellation of hope and progress spreading out beneath me. I turned away from the glowing skyline and looked directly forward, breaking the invisible barrier between my reality and yours. I looked straight into the lens, my posture rigid and my gaze unblinking. Listen to me very carefully. If you take anything away from my story, let it be this one undeniable truth. Never underestimate the silence of an old man. When we stop arguing, when we stop complaining about the disrespect, and when we simply sit quietly in our armchairs staring blankly at the wall, people assume we have given up. They assume we are peacefully fading into the background, surrendering to the inevitable twilight of our years. But they are dead wrong, because sometimes that silence is not submission. Sometimes that silence is not defeat. Sometimes that silence is just us taking a deep breath, calculating the angles, and quietly reloading. Furthermore, I learned the hardest truth about family. Society teaches us that blood is thicker than water and that we must blindly forgive the people who share our last name. But that is a dangerous lie. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to disrespect, abuse, or destroy you. True family is not determined by biology. It is defined by unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and shared values. I had to mourn the son I thought I raised, but in doing so, I found a brotherhood of honorable men who stood by my side when the wolves came circling. Never be afraid to cut toxic ties, even if they share your DNA. If my journey gave you the strength to stand up to the toxic people in your own life, hit the subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. They were already lining up a corporate buyer. They were going to sell the legacy I built with my bare hands. But they had vastly underestimated me. The name Apex echoed in my mind like a death knell. Apex Development was the ruthless corporate conglomerate aggressively swallowing up our neighborhood block by block. They were infamous for bulldozing historic black-owned businesses to build soulless luxury condominiums and high-end shopping centers. They had been trying to buy my commercial building for years, but I always refused to sell out my community. The fact that my own son was conspiring with these corporate vultures was the ultimate betrayal. He was selling out his own heritage for quick cash. I did not sit around feeling sorry for myself. The time for mourning the son I thought I had was officially over. I grabbed my heavy wool coat and stepped out the front door. I bypassed my own vehicle once again and flagged down a passing taxi. I ordered the driver to take me straight to the downtown financial district. I explicitly avoided my local bank branch where the tellers knew me by name and might inadvertently tip off Tyson about my sudden visit. I needed absolute discretion and top-tier authority. I walked through the towering glass doors of the central banking headquarters and demanded a private face-to-face meeting with the regional director. I had been a high-net-worth client for over 30 years, maintaining pristine accounts. Within minutes, they ushered me into a soundproof executive office. Mr. Mitchell, a sharp man in a tailored suit, sat across from his massive oak desk. He poured me a glass of water and quickly pulled up my extensive financial portfolio on his dual monitors. I asked him to run a comprehensive forensic audit of every single account attached to my Social Security number. For a few agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid clicking of his keyboard. Then his brow furrowed deeply. The color seemed to drain from his face. "Mr. Pierce," he began, his voice laced with genuine professional concern, "your primary commercial accounts and property escrows are completely secure. However, there is massive, highly irregular activity on your secondary credit line." I leaned forward, my heart sinking into my stomach. "How massive?" I asked. Mitchell turned the monitor toward me so I could see the spreadsheet. The outstanding balance was a staggering $80,000. The numbers blurred together on the glowing screen. That specific account held a deeply personal and sacred significance to me. For the past 5 years, I had been quietly funneling my personal savings into that credit line. It was seed money. I was preparing to establish the Lorraine Pierce Memorial Scholarship Fund. It was supposed to be a beacon of hope for brilliant young black students in our community who just needed a chance to afford college tuition. It was my way of keeping my beautiful wife's memory alive and giving back to the streets that raised me, instead of funding educations that money had been brutally butchered. Mitchell scrolled through the itemized statements. The charges were a grotesque display of superficial vanity. There were $10,000 transactions at high-end designer boutiques in Buckhead, There were massive bills from five-star beach resorts, luxury wellness spas, and a hefty down payment for a brand new Mercedes-Benz. Tyson had a supplementary card for absolute life-or-death emergencies only. But the digital signatures authorizing these massive transfers did not match his handwriting. They were authorized by Megan. She had systematically drained the memorial fund meant to honor my dead wife just so she could parade around town wearing expensive labels and driving a luxury car. The sheer disrespect made my blood boil in my veins. They were not just stealing my hard-earned money. They were practically spitting on Lorraine's grave. Mitchell reached for his desk phone immediately. "Mr. Pierce, I need to freeze this account right now and contact our internal fraud department. We can alert the local authorities before they drain another single penny from your name." I raised my hand and stopped him halfway to the receiver. "Do not freeze the account," I commanded. My voice was eerily calm, stripped of all panic and replaced with a lethal coldness. Mitchell looked at me as if I had completely lost my mind. I explained my reasoning. Cutting off their access right now would only tip them off. If Tyson and Megan realized the money hose was suddenly turned off, they would instantly know I was onto them. They would panic and accelerate their plans to sell my commercial building to Apex. Or worse, they might realize the poison was not working fast enough and try a more immediate violent method to end my life. I needed them to feel completely comfortable. I collapsed over the porcelain, gripping the edges until my knuckles ached, heaving until there was nothing left but a bitter taste in my mouth. This had been my morning routine for months. My joints felt like rusted iron, my hair was thinning rapidly, and a constant thick fog clouded my mind. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at the hollow, exhausted reflection in the mirror. I truly thought I was dying. I thought my time on this earth was simply running out. I shuffled into the kitchen to make my daily cup of herbal tea. It was a special blend, a thoughtful birthday gift from my son Tyson. It came in a beautiful mahogany box. He told me it was imported, designed specifically to boost the immune system of seniors. I was reaching for the kettle when the front door chimed. It was Arthur Abernathy, my neighbor of 20 years. Abernathy was a 75-year-old retired Army veteran who used to work in military chemical units. He still had the sharp eyes of a hawk. I needed them to feel invincible and arrogant. I looked Mitchell dead in the eye and outlined my counterattack. "I want you to leave that credit line completely open. Let them keep swiping that card. Let them keep buying their expensive shoes and their lavish dinners. But I want your IT department to flag every single incoming transaction. I want you to trace and record the IP addresses of every single smartphone and computer used to authorize these online transfers. I want you to isolate and digitally archive every single forged signature Megan has submitted to this bank." Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, a look of profound understanding slowly dawning on his face. "You are building a criminal case," he whispered in awe. I nodded slowly. "I am not just building a small case for the local police. The sheer amount of money crossing state lines for those luxury resort purchases constitutes federal wire fraud and felony identity theft. I want a complete shadow ledger compiled by your best forensic accountants. I want a digital paper trail so airtight that not even the most expensive corporate defense lawyer in the state of Georgia can get them out of a federal prison sentence." Mitchell firmly agreed to the plan. He personally bypassed the standard automated security protocols to ensure no fraud alerts would be sent to Tyson's phone. He set up a direct, secure channel for me to monitor their spending in real time. I thanked Mitchell and walked out of the bank with a razor-sharp focus. They thought they were dealing with a senile, dying old man whose brain was rotting away. They forgot that I built a real estate empire from the ground up by being the smartest and most ruthless man in the room. I took a taxi back to my neighborhood, feeling a grim sense of control over the situation. I had successfully secured my financial trap at the bank, and now I needed to focus on protecting the commercial building itself. But the moment my boots crunched against the gravel of my driveway, my survival instincts flared violently. The heavy iron gate leading to my backyard was left slightly ajar. I walked cautiously around the side of the house and my stomach plummeted. The heavy wooden back door had been brutally pried open. The deadbolt mechanism was completely shattered, leaving deep splintered gouges in the wooden door frame. I rushed inside, ignoring the potential danger of an intruder still being present. I ran through the living room and noticed the house had not been ransacked at all. The expensive television and the modern electronics were completely untouched. The intruder knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where to find it. I sprinted down the hallway to my private study. The large oil painting of Lorraine that usually hung perfectly straight on the far wall was tossed carelessly onto the rug. Behind it, my heavy steel wall safe was wide open. Its thick metal door had been forced off its hinges by a heavy-duty crowbar. They had clearly used industrial tools, the kind Tyson kept stored in his garage. I dropped to my knees and shoved my hands into the dark metal cavity, frantically sorting through the remaining tax documents and old photographs. My heart stopped beating for a full second. The original physical deed to my multi-million-dollar commercial building was gone. I knelt on the floor, staring into the hollow belly of the steel safe. The missing deed was the final nail in the coffin of my fatherly delusions. Any lingering hope that Tyson was just misguided or manipulated by his wife evaporated into the cold air of my study. He had crossed the line from a greedy son to a common burglar. I did not shed a tear. I did not scream. I felt a profound, icy calm settle over my soul. The boy I raised was dead to me. In his place stood a desperate thief who wanted me in the ground. I stood up, brushed the dust from my knees, and pulled out my cell phone. I bypassed the police entirely. I needed someone who operated in the shadows, someone who did not care about warrants or jurisdictions. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed the number for Vaughn. Vaughn was an ex-detective who left the force to start a private intelligence firm. He was expensive, discreet, and ruthless. When he answered on the second ring, I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him my house had been breached and my own flesh and blood was the prime suspect. I needed him at my property within the hour. Exactly 3 days later, Vaughn sat across from me at my kitchen table, sliding a thick manila folder across the polished wood. The contents of that folder painted a pathetic and terrifying picture of my son's reality. For years, Tyson had paraded around Atlanta wearing tailored suits and bragging at family barbecues about his booming tech startup. He portrayed himself as a self-made visionary, a CEO on the brink of taking his company public. It was all a massive theatrical illusion. The documents Vaughn uncovered proved the startup had quietly filed for bankruptcy over 2 years ago. Tyson had zero income. Instead, he had developed a severe gambling addiction, funding his and Megan's lavish lifestyle through underground sports betting and high-interest loans from the worst kind of people. Vaughn pointed to a stark spreadsheet highlighting a catastrophic red number. Tyson was currently $300,000 in debt to a violent local syndicate known for breaking bones and disappearing people. The loan sharks had given him a hard deadline. My commercial building, located in a prime gentrifying district, was easily worth $4 million in cash to the right corporate buyer like Apex. It was the ultimate golden parachute. It was the only asset that could save Tyson from having his legs shattered or winding up at the bottom of the Chattahoochee River. He was not just greedy. He was backed into a lethal corner, acting out of pure primal desperation. To save his own skin, he had decided his elderly father had to die. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward Vaughn. The anger inside me solidified into something dangerous and calculated. I asked Vaughn what our next move was. He smirked, pulling a sleek black metallic case from his duffel bag. "We do not just wait for them to strike again," Vaughn said. "We turn this house into a fortress. We control the narrative. We document every breath they take inside these walls." For the next 6 hours, my home was transformed into a high-tech surveillance trap. Vaughn and his associate worked with surgical precision. They replaced my standard smoke detectors with identical units containing high-definition microcameras, equipped with wide-angle lenses and infrared night vision. They drilled tiny holes into the baseboards of the living room, hiding audio bugs smaller than a dime. They placed a microscopic lens inside the spine of a hardcover book on my study desk, pointing directly at the safe. They even wired the dining room table, taping a flat audio transmitter right under the spot where Megan usually sat during her fake visits. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a functioning movie set designed to catch rats. I walked through the rooms, testing the angles on a secure tablet Vaughn handed me. The audio was crystal clear, picking up the faintest whispers from the hallway. The video feeds covered every possible blind spot. I was the director, and Tyson and Megan were the unwitting actors in a tragedy of their own making. Vaughn also set up an encrypted cloud server that would instantly upload any recorded data, ensuring that even if they destroyed the cameras, the evidence would be securely vaulted. I spent the evening rehearsing my role. I had to continue playing the deteriorating, confused old man. I practiced a slight tremor in my hands, a vacant stare, and a slow, shuffling walk. I needed to convince them that the thallium was rapidly eating away at my brain and body. I needed them to feel so confident in their victory that they would slip up and confess their crimes right into my hidden microphones. I told Vaughn I wanted to schedule a meeting with them soon to bait them into discussing the stolen deed. But Vaughn held up his hand, stopping me. "We do not need to bait them, Randall," Vaughn said, his expression turning deadly serious. "I already took the liberty of mirroring Tyson's smartphone. I have access to his texts, his emails, and his microphone." He pulled out his tablet and tapped a highly encrypted audio file. "You need to hear what they were discussing in their car just an hour ago." He pressed play. The ambient hum of highway traffic filled my kitchen, followed by the unmistakable, venomous voice of my daughter-in-law. "The poisoned tea is moving way too slow," Megan hissed, her voice dripping with frustration. "The old fool is still walking around complaining about stomach aches. We do not have 6 months. The loan sharks called again today, Tyson. They threatened to visit my mother's house." Tyson mumbled something nervously in the background, but Megan sharply cut him off. "Listen to me carefully," she ordered. "I bought a specialized compound on the dark web today. It is a synthetic chemical that triggers a massive, undetectable heart attack within minutes of entering the bloodstream. It leaves no trace in a standard autopsy. We are not waiting anymore. Next week is his 69th birthday party. We inject him during the celebration." He let himself in holding a newspaper, but stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me opening the mahogany box. He dropped the paper, rushed across the kitchen, and snatched the box right out of my hands. I stood there stunned as he held the wooden container away from me, his face pale and tense. "What in the world has gotten into you, Arthur?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "Give that back. It is my tea. Tyson bought it for me." I felt a sudden surge of defensive anger. Tyson was my only child, my own flesh and blood. Since my beautiful wife Lorraine passed away 5 years ago, Tyson was all I had left in this world. I had broken my back for 40 years as a black man in Atlanta, working 14-hour shifts, laying bricks, dealing with racist contractors, and saving every single penny. I skipped meals and holidays just to buy a commercial building in a neighborhood that was now gentrifying and worth millions. That building was my legacy, my ultimate gift to Tyson. The evening of my 69th birthday arrived with a suffocating humidity that hung heavy over Atlanta. My house was a silent fortress of hidden cameras and microscopic audio bugs waiting to capture the performance of a lifetime. I stood in front of the hallway mirror practicing the posture of a dying man. I slouched my shoulders, let my hands tremble slightly, and practiced a vacant, exhausted stare. Tonight, I was hosting the 2 people actively planning my murder. When the doorbell finally rang, I took a slow, deep breath and shuffled toward the entrance, leaning heavily on a wooden cane I had purchased specifically for this charade. I opened the door to find Tyson and Megan standing on my porch. Tyson held a brightly wrapped gift box, while Megan carried a massive, extravagant chocolate raspberry cake in a pristine white bakery box. They greeted me with wide, flashing smiles that did not reach their eyes. "Happy birthday, Dad," Tyson announced, stepping inside and pulling me into a rigid, unnatural hug. "We wanted to make tonight incredibly special for you." Megan followed closely behind, her eyes darting around my living room before settling on me. She wore a stunning, pure white silk designer dress radiating an air of arrogant superiority. "We know you have been feeling weak lately, Randall," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. "So we brought the celebration directly to you." I thanked them graciously, playing the role of the oblivious, grateful father. I slowly led them into the dining room where I had set the table. Every single angle of this room was covered by Vaughn's high-definition cameras. I knew exactly what they were planning. The audio recording from their car had revealed Megan's intention to use a synthetic, undetectable chemical compound. She had initially planned to inject me directly, but doing so by force would be risky and leave a puncture wound. Injecting that lethal compound directly into a specific slice of birthday cake, however, was the perfect invisible delivery system. We sat around the dining table making hollow, agonizing small talk. Tyson rambled on about fake business deals while Megan continually checked her diamond watch, clearly eager to get the execution underway. After a painfully tense dinner, Megan stood up and clapped her hands together with exaggerated excitement. "It is time for dessert," she declared, walking over to the kitchen counter to retrieve the cake. I watched her every move through the reflection of the dining room window. She opened the bakery box and pulled out a large silver kitchen knife. I noticed a tiny, rigid stiffness in her posture as she sliced into the rich chocolate frosting. She cut 2 standard pieces, placing them on plain white ceramic plates. Then she cut a 3rd piece. This slice was cut from a very specific side of the cake. She carefully slid a small plastic syringe from her pocket, injected a clear liquid directly into the center of the sponge, and quickly covered the microscopic hole with a smear of raspberry filling. She placed this tainted slice onto a plate with a subtle gold floral pattern along the rim. She carried the plates to the table, setting the plain ones in front of herself and Tyson. Then she placed the gold floral plate directly in front of me. "For the birthday boy," Megan said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I put extra raspberry filling on yours. I know it is your favorite." I stared down at the dark chocolate cake. Inside that sweet frosting was a chemical designed to trigger a massive catastrophic heart attack within hours. I looked up at my son. Tyson was staring intently at my plate, a thin layer of nervous sweat forming on his forehead. He swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He knew exactly what was in that cake. He was sitting there watching the father who raised him prepare to consume a lethal dose of poison, and he did not say a single word to stop it. The sheer depravity of his silence shattered whatever tiny microscopic fragment of paternal love I had left for him. They picked up their forks, waiting for me to take the first bite. The tension in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. They were staring at me like predators waiting for a wounded animal to take its final breath. I needed a distraction, and it had to be flawless. I reached out with my right hand, letting it shake violently, playing up the severe neurological damage I supposedly suffered from the thallium. My fingers brushed against my large crystal glass filled to the brim with dark, heavy Cabernet Sauvignon. As I brought the glass toward my lips, I intentionally let my wrist spasm and collapse. The heavy crystal slipped from my grip and crashed hard against the edge of the dining table. A massive wave of dark crimson wine exploded outward, splashing directly across the front of Megan's pristine white silk dress. The dark liquid soaked instantly into the expensive fabric, spreading like a fresh bloodstain across her chest and lap. Megan let out a piercing, ear-shattering shriek. Her carefully constructed facade of the caring daughter-in-law vanished instantly. She jumped up from her chair, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Are you kidding me?" she screamed, staring down at her ruined designer dress. "This is custom silk. You clumsy old fool." Tyson leaped out of his chair, panicked by her outburst and the sudden chaos. "Megan, babe, it is okay," he stammered, grabbing a handful of paper napkins and trying to dab at the massive red stain. "Do not touch it, you will rub it in," she snapped, slapping his hands away. "Where's your bathroom? I need club soda right now." She aggressively stomped down the hallway toward the guest bathroom, cursing under her breath. Tyson shot me a look of frantic frustration before sprinting after her to help manage the disaster. The dining room was suddenly completely empty. The distraction had worked perfectly. I had exactly 5 seconds. I dropped the shaky old man routine instantly. My hands were rock steady as I reached across the table. I grabbed the gold floral plate containing the poisoned slice of cake and swapped it with the plain white plate sitting directly in front of Tyson's empty chair. I slid my new clean slice in front of me and quickly wiped a drop of spilled wine off the table. By the time Tyson hurried back into the dining room looking flushed and stressed, I was slumped back in my chair, clutching my chest and hyperventilating as if the accident had severely startled me. "I am so sorry, Tyson," I gasped, gripping the armrests. My hands, they just completely gave out. "I am so clumsy." Tyson waved me off, clearly eager to get back to the main objective. "It is fine, Dad. Just an accident," he muttered, sitting back down in his chair. "Megan is dealing with it. Just eat your cake. You need the sugar to calm your nerves." Megan returned a few minutes later, her dress covered in wet pink splotches, her face dark with fury. She sat down aggressively, crossing her arms and glaring at me. But her eyes quickly shifted to the gold floral plate. Seeing that it was no longer in front of me, but she failed to realize it was now sitting in front of her husband. She assumed I had simply moved it away from the spill. "Eat, Randall," she demanded, her tone entirely devoid of warmth. I picked up my fork, broke off a piece of the harmless chocolate sponge and placed it in my mouth. "It is delicious," I said, offering a weak smile. Tyson, eager to finish this agonizing dinner and secure his inheritance, grabbed his own fork. He dug into the slice on the gold floral plate. I watched with absolute freezing cold calculation as my son chewed and swallowed the poisoned cake in 3 massive, oblivious bites. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, utterly unaware that he had just ingested the very weapon he intended to use on me. The party wrapped up shortly after. They practically ran out the front door the moment I finished my slice, eager to get far away from the house before the synthetic chemical took effect. I locked the door behind them, walked into my study, and opened the surveillance feeds on my tablet. I sat in the dark, waiting. The chemical was designed to mimic a massive heart attack hours after ingestion. I did not know exactly how long it would take, but I knew the exact destination it was heading. At 2:45 in the morning, the dead silence of my house was shattered by the shrill ringing of my cell phone. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, answering in a groggy, sleepy voice. "Hello?" On the other end of the line was pure hysterical chaos. Megan was screaming, sobbing so hard she could barely form a coherent sentence. "Randall," she shrieked, her voice echoing with absolute terror. "You have to come to Atlanta General Hospital right now. It is Tyson. He is in the emergency room. He started vomiting blood all over the bathroom and his heart rate is collapsing. The doctors are saying he is going into sudden cardiac arrest, and they do not know why." I maintained my calm, sleepy facade, asking her what happened and expressing fake shock. But in her frantic, panicked state, Megan's brain completely short-circuited. The reality of the situation clashed violently with her meticulous plan, and she lost all control of her filter. She screamed directly into the receiver, her voice cracking with desperate confusion. "Randall, did you not eat the cake? Why is Tyson the one who is sick?" I hung up the phone and waited in the suffocating silence of my living room. I did not rush to the hospital. And now my neighbor was snatching away a simple gift my son gave me. Abernathy did not yell back. Instead, he placed the box carefully on the kitchen island. He pulled a small pocket knife from his trousers and gently scraped the bottom corner of the wooden interior. He held the blade up to the light. "Look at this, Randall," he said, his voice deadly serious. I squinted. There was a fine white powder coating the tip of the blade. I scoffed, telling him it was just wood dust or some leftover residue from the tea leaves. Abernathy shook his head slowly. "I spent 20 years analyzing chemical agents, Randall. This is not wood dust. This is thallium. It is a heavy metal toxin. It has no taste, no smell, and it dissolves perfectly in hot water. It does not kill you right away. It slowly destroys your nervous system, causes hair loss, and shuts down your internal organs piece by piece." He looked me dead in the eye. "Whoever gave you this is not trying to help you." I did not shed a single tear for the son who had just consumed his own murder weapon. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta, my private investigator Vaughn called me with an update from his contacts at the hospital. Tyson had survived. The lethal dose of the synthetic compound Megan purchased on the dark web was meticulously calculated to trigger a catastrophic heart attack in a frail 69-year-old man. It was not meant for a reasonably healthy 38-year-old. Tyson's heart had stopped for a terrifying 2 minutes, but the emergency room doctors managed to resuscitate him. He was alive, heavily sedated in the intensive care unit, breathing through a tube with permanent damage to his cardiovascular system. He would survive, but the failed execution sent a massive shockwave through Megan's timeline. Her lethal shortcut had failed spectacularly. Her husband was incapacitated, the loan sharks were still demanding their $300,000, and I was still very much alive, sitting on a real estate gold mine. Panic breeds a special kind of reckless desperation. If she could not put me in the ground, she had to erase my legal existence entirely. She needed to strip me of my rights, my voice, and my autonomy. She had to prove I was a madman. 3 days later, while Tyson was still hooked up to monitors in the cardiac ward, the heavy deadbolt of my front door clicked open. Megan had kept a spare key, marching into my home as if she already owned the deed. She was not alone. Trailing closely behind her was a tall, excessively sweating man clutching a worn leather binder. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit and a patronizing, greasy smile. Megan introduced him as Dr. Eris Thorne, a private psychiatric specialist she claimed she had hired out of deep, agonizing concern for my rapidly deteriorating mental state. I played my part flawlessly. I sank deep into my armchair, letting my jaw hang slightly slack, staring blankly at the television screen that was not even turned on. Thorne did not waste time with standard medical pleasantries. He did not ask for my medical history or consult my primary care physician. He immediately began firing aggressive leading questions at me, treating me like a hostile witness rather than a patient. He asked if I often forgot what year it was, if I felt paranoid that my own family was out to get me, and if I had any memory of tampering with the dessert at my birthday party. Megan stood in the corner of my living room, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a silk tissue. She spun a horrifying, entirely fabricated narrative to the corrupt doctor. She claimed I had been exhibiting severe psychotic breaks for months, hallucinating intruders and screaming at shadows. Then she delivered her boldest, most venomous lie yet. She told Thorne that in a fit of severe dementia-induced paranoia, I must have completely lost my mind and accidentally poisoned the birthday cake myself, nearly murdering my own beloved son in a tragic, senile delusion. Thorne nodded sympathetically, scribbling furiously on his notepad. Within 15 minutes, without running a single standardized cognitive test, checking my vitals or asking for a blood sample, this absolute fraud of a doctor concluded his assessment. He loudly declared that I was suffering from advanced aggressive dementia accompanied by highly dangerous psychotic delusions. He stated unequivocally that I was an immediate physical threat to myself and others, and that I required an involuntary psychiatric hold and total relinquishment of my financial autonomy to my next of kin. I sat perfectly still on the sofa, staring at the floor with wide, seemingly frightened eyes. I looked exactly like a broken, helpless old man whose mind was crumbling under the weight of reality. But beneath the wooden edge of my coffee table, my index finger found the hidden button of the high-definition audio recorder Vaughn had installed days ago. I pressed it firmly, feeling the silent, satisfying click. I looked up at Thorne intentionally, letting my voice shake and crack. "Doctor, I do not understand," I stammered, playing the terrified victim. "How can you declare me incompetent so quickly? You have not asked me who the president is, what day of the week it is, or even checked my blood pressure." Thorne scoffed arrogantly, adjusting his cheap tie. "Mr. Pierce," he said condescendingly, "the behavioral evidence presented by your daughter-in-law is overwhelming and undeniable. Your cognitive decline is textbook. I am signing the committal papers right now." I dropped the shaky voice instantly. My posture straightened, my shoulders squared, and I locked my eyes onto his. My gaze was no longer vacant. It was piercing, calculated, and razor-sharp. "Is it textbook, Doctor?" "Thorne." I asked, my tone steady, deep, and completely devoid of confusion. "Or is it just highly profitable?" Thorne blinked rapidly, physically taken aback by my sudden, aggressive shift in demeanor. "Excuse me," he sputtered, his pen freezing over the fraudulent paperwork. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I asked if your rapid, baseless diagnosis is standard medical practice, or if it is simply a premium service you provide for a specific untraceable fee. Let us say exactly $10,000 transferred to your offshore account in the Cayman Islands yesterday morning." Megan froze. The color drained entirely from Thorne's sweaty face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked at Megan, pure, unadulterated panic flashing in his eyes. "How could you possibly know about that wire transfer?" Thorne stammered, his professional facade collapsing into rubble instantly. He realized his catastrophic mistake the exact second the words left his mouth. He had just verbally confirmed the bribe. I smiled a cold, unforgiving smile, because a real psychiatrist would know better than to blindly diagnose a man who spent 40 years navigating the most ruthless, cutthroat commercial real estate markets in Atlanta. "I know you are not a reputable doctor, Thorne. I know your medical license is currently under review by the state board for writing fraudulent prescriptions for opioid addicts. And thanks to my private investigator, I know exactly how much Megan paid you to write a fake certificate of incompetence so she could steal my commercial building to pay off her husband's gambling debts. You just confirmed the illegal financial transaction right into a federal-grade recording device hidden in this very room." Megan's eyes widened in sheer, absolute terror. The smug, arrogant mask she had worn for years shattered into a million pieces. She realized the trap had violently snapped shut around her throat. Driven by pure animalistic panic, she lunged forward, snatching the fraudulent psychiatric certificate right out of Thorne's trembling hands. She turned on her expensive heels, ready to sprint out the front door, destroy the paper evidence, and run as far away from Atlanta as possible. But before she could take 3 steps toward the exit, the heavy oak door of my guest bedroom swung open. Out stepped Mr. Cohen, my powerhouse corporate attorney, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit and clutching a sleek silver briefcase. He stepped directly into the center of the hallway, completely blocking her path to the front door. He looked down at Megan with the cold, calculating grin of a predator who had just cornered his prey. "I would not rip that paper if I were you," Mr. Cohen said, his voice echoing through the house with absolute terrifying legal authority. "Falsifying medical records to seize financial assets from a senior citizen is a severe federal offense. That little piece of paper you are holding in your hand carries a mandatory 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, young lady, and I am going to make absolutely sure you serve every single day of it." Megan's face drained of every ounce of color. The threat of a 15-year federal prison sentence hit her like a physical blow. She dropped the fraudulent psychiatric certificate as if it were a burning piece of coal. Without saying a single word or attempting to defend her actions, she shoved past Mr. Cohen, her expensive designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. She practically tore the front door off its hinges, sprinting out to her luxury sedan parked in the driveway. Seconds later, I heard the tires squeal violently against the asphalt as she sped away, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust. The house fell eerily quiet. Mr. Cohen calmly bent down, retrieved the discarded document, and placed it carefully into his sleek silver briefcase. "The trap worked perfectly, Randall," he said, adjusting his glasses with clinical precision. "But do not celebrate just yet. We have effectively cornered a pair of starving wolves. They know they are completely out of time and out of options. Cornered animals do not surrender. They fight to the death." I nodded, feeling a heavy knot tighten in my chest. Tyson and Megan were staring down the barrel of massive mob debts and now federal fraud charges. They were going to make a reckless, desperate move. My instincts were entirely correct. Less than 4 hours after Megan fled my house, Vaughn called me with a highly alarming update. Tyson had completely ignored his doctors. Still weak and physically recovering from the very synthetic poison meant to kill me, he had violently ripped the IV out of his arm. He signed a discharge against medical advice and limped out of Atlanta General Hospital, fueled entirely by panic. "They are trying to execute you slowly." The word echoed in my quiet kitchen. Execute. I wanted to punch Abernathy. I wanted to throw him out of my house for daring to accuse my son of such a monstrous act. Tyson might be bad with money, and yes, he liked to live a flashy lifestyle to impress his new white wife Megan, but he was not a murderer. Megan had always turned her nose up at my home and my roots, demanding a luxury lifestyle that Tyson could not afford, but surely they would never cross this line. I refused to believe the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I carried on my shoulders, was poisoning his own father. Yet my stomach turned, and the chronic pain in my bones suddenly felt terrifyingly sinister. I did not call the police. I could not. If Abernathy was wrong, the police would ruin my son's reputation forever. I had to know for sure privately. I told Abernathy to leave. I packed a few tablespoons of the tea and the white powder into a sterile plastic Ziploc bag. He and Megan had regrouped, retrieved the stolen original physical deed to my commercial building from wherever they had hidden it, and driven straight into the belly of the beast. They went directly to the towering glass headquarters of Apex Development. Apex was not just a typical real estate firm. They were aggressive corporate predators led by a notoriously ruthless billionaire. For decades, they had systematically targeted historic black-owned neighborhoods in Atlanta, utilizing predatory lending tactics and political intimidation to push out local business owners. Their ultimate master plan was to bulldoze our vibrant cultural district and replace it with a sterile high-end shopping mall catering exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. My building sat right in the geographical center of their proposed demolition zone. It was the crucial keystone property they needed to break ground. I had rejected their lowball buyout offers for years, refusing to let them erase our community history. But Tyson did not care about history or community or legacy. He only cared about saving his own skin from the violent loan sharks. Inside a sprawling boardroom on the 40th floor, Tyson and Megan laid my stolen deed on a massive mahogany table. Bypassing standard legal protocols and completely ignoring the fact that Tyson did not have a legitimate power of attorney. The executives at Apex smelled blood in the water. They knew a desperate, vulnerable seller when they saw one. They drafted a rapid pre-sale agreement valuing my multi-million-dollar legacy at a highly discounted $4 million. Tyson, with hands still trembling from his recent cardiac arrest, signed his name across the dotted line, attempting to sell a property he did not legally own. He sold out his father, his heritage, and his soul in one stroke of a pen. What Tyson and the arrogant executives at Apex failed to realize was that they were not operating in secret. Vaughn, my private investigator, was already 3 steps ahead of them. Utilizing an informant inside the Apex security team, Vaughn had managed to secure a clear line of sight into the glass-walled boardroom. Utilizing a high-powered telephoto lens from a commercial building across the street, he photographed the entire illicit transaction. He captured crystal-clear, high-definition images of Tyson signing the pre-sale documents, Megan eagerly watching over his shoulder, and the Apex directors shaking hands with a man who was visibly unwell and legally unauthorized to sell the property. Vaughn securely transmitted the encrypted photographs directly to Mr. Cohen's tablet while we sat in my living room. I looked at the digital images of my son selling out my life's work and felt a cold, clinical resolve wash over me. There was no more room for sorrow or parental grief. only tactical execution. I turned to Mr. Cohen and gave him the absolute green light to proceed. Mr. Cohen did not waste a single second. He immediately opened his laptop and drafted an emergency revocation of power of attorney explicitly naming Tyson Pierce and permanently nullifying any and all perceived financial authority he might claim to possess. But Cohen did not stop there. He drafted a comprehensive injunction petition outlining the theft of the physical deed, the fraudulent medical diagnoses, and the unauthorized pre-sale agreement orchestrated by Apex. We took my secure vehicle and drove directly to the state courthouse. Because of Cohen's elite status in the legal community and the overwhelming mountain of digital and photographic evidence, we bypassed the standard bureaucratic delays. We stood before a superior court judge within the hour. The judge took one look at the forged documents, the photographic evidence of the stolen deed, and the medical timeline of Tyson's hospitalization. He immediately slammed his wooden gavel down. He issued a statewide freeze on all assets tied to my name and my commercial building. He placed a hard legal lock on the property deed, rendering any contract signed by Tyson utterly worthless. The property could not be sold, transferred, or demolished by Apex or anyone else. We had successfully blocked the sale and legally neutralized Tyson's desperate maneuver. I walked out of the courthouse feeling a surge of absolute triumph. The legal shield was perfectly in place. I looked up at the towering columns of the Justice Building, breathing in the warm Atlanta air. I had beaten my son at his own twisted game. I had protected Lorraine's memory and the future of my community. I turned to Mr. Cohen, shaking his hand firmly. "We did it," I told him. "We cut the strings on their entire operation." But the illusion of victory was painfully short-lived. As I stepped down the concrete steps of the courthouse, my cell phone began to ring. It was an unknown, restricted number. I answered it, expecting it to be Vaughn with another surveillance update on Tyson's movements. Instead, a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the speaker. The tone was chillingly calm and reeked of absolute, unchecked power. It was the billionaire CEO of Apex Development himself. "Mr. Pierce," the voice said, dripping with raw menace. "Your son just walked out of my building with a non-refundable $500,000 cash deposit. He signed a binding contract. I do not care about your little court injunctions, your hidden cameras, or your clever corporate lawyers. You are playing a dangerous game with very serious people." I stood frozen on the courthouse steps, listening to the sheer venom in his voice. "You have two choices, old man," the billionaire continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Either you hand over the keys and the legal rights to that building by Friday, or I will personally ensure your life ends long before you ever see the inside of a courtroom. Welcome to the real world." The line went dead. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a flat and lifeless sound that mirrored the cold reality of my situation. I lowered the phone, the violent threats of the Apex CEO echoing in my mind. I was trapped between two entirely different breeds of predators. On one side, I had a multi-billion-dollar corporate syndicate willing to orchestrate an assassination to bulldoze a historic black neighborhood. On the other side, I had my own flesh and blood, a son so corrupted by greed and a daughter-in-law so poisoned by entitlement that they were actively plotting my demise. My legal maneuvers had successfully blocked the sale and bought me time, but paper shields do not stop bullets. If I waited for the federal authorities to untangle this massive web of corporate fraud, Apex would make good on their promise, or Tyson and Megan would simply find another way to finish the job. I needed to force their hands. I needed to push them into a corner so tight and so desperate that they would commit a crime so undeniable in front of the right people that no expensive defense lawyer could ever save them. I had to orchestrate my own downfall. I had to die, or at least look the part perfectly. I did not return home. I went straight to the only man in Atlanta I knew I could trust with my life. I knocked on Arthur Abernathy's door just as the streetlights began to flicker on, casting long shadows across the pavement. He opened the door, his sharp veteran eyes instantly reading the gravity on my face. I walked into his kitchen, the exact place where this nightmare had begun, with that mahogany tea box. I laid everything out for him. I told him about the federal wire fraud, the stolen deed, the court injunction, and the lethal threat from the Apex CEO. Then I told him what I needed him to do. Abernathy stared at me, his jaw clenched tight. "I need you to use your military chemistry background, Arthur," I said, my voice unwavering. "I need a compound. something that will artificially suppress my heart rate, crash my blood pressure, and mimic the exact physiological signs of acute multiple organ failure. I need to look completely comatose to any standard medical monitor. Abernathy immediately refused. He paced the kitchen floor, arguing fiercely that deliberately inducing those symptoms in a man my age could cause a real fatal cardiac arrest. He warned me that the line between a simulated coma and actual physical death was razor thin. But I did not back down. I reminded him that if I did nothing, Apex or my own son would put me in the ground by Friday anyway. This was my only tactical advantage. I had to dictate the terms of the battlefield. Abernathy finally stopped pacing. He looked at me with a solemn, grim respect and nodded. He spent the next 4 hours locked in his basement workshop. When he emerged, he held a small, unmarked amber vial. He explained the precise dosage and the timeline. It would take exactly 20 minutes to hit my central nervous system. My breathing would turn shallow, my skin would turn pale gray, and my heart rate would drop to a terrifyingly low rhythm. I took the vial, thanked my oldest friend, and walked back to my own house. I unlocked the front door, stepped into the quiet living room, and swallowed the bitter liquid in one quick gulp. I set a timer on my watch for 18 minutes. I sat in my armchair, staring at the walls I had painted with my late wife Lorraine, waiting for the darkness to take hold. I wondered if she was watching from above, weeping at what our family had become, or if she was cheering me on to burn this corruption to the ground. I chose to believe the latter. At exactly 18 minutes, my vision blurred. My chest tightened with an agonizing, crushing weight. My legs went completely numb. I bypassed my own car, afraid that somehow my movements were being tracked or observed. I walked 3 blocks and hailed a taxi, paying the driver in cash to take me to a private, independent toxicology lab in the northern suburbs. The ride felt like an eternity. I stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, the city where I built my life, feeling a cold dread creeping up my spine. At the lab, I paid a premium fee for an expedited emergency analysis. I sat in their sterile waiting room for 4 agonizing hours. Every minute felt like a rusty nail being driven into my chest. I prayed to God, to Lorraine, to anyone who would listen, that Abernathy was just a paranoid old fool. I prayed the results would show nothing but organic herbs and harmless dust. I remembered Tyson as a little boy holding my hand walking down these very streets. The contrast between that memory and why I was sitting in this lab threatened to tear my heart in two. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialed 911, whispered that I was having a massive heart attack, and let the phone slip from my fingers as the world faded to black. I awoke to the harsh, rhythmic beeping of hospital machinery and the sterile chemical smell of an intensive care unit. I kept my eyes firmly shut, forcing my breathing to remain shallow and labored. I could feel the cold plastic of an oxygen mask strapped over my face and a dozen adhesive monitor pads pulling at the skin on my chest. I was fully conscious, my mind razor sharp, but physically I was entirely immobilized by the residual heavy effects of Abernathy's compound. The heavy pressurized door of my ICU room slid open. I heard the squeak of rubber soles on the linoleum floor. It was Dr. Arrington, the chief of cardiology at Atlanta General. He was not a corrupt hack like the fraud Megan had hired. He was an honorable man, a man whose medical school tuition had been quietly partially funded by a community grant I had established 20 years ago. Before I took the vial, Mr. Cohen had paid a highly confidential visit to Dr. Arrington, explaining the imminent threat to my life and securing his absolute cooperation in this dangerous charade. Through my closed eyelids, I heard the door slide open again. 2 sets of hurried, anxious footsteps entered the room. Tyson and Megan. Dr. Arrington cleared his throat, his voice projecting the perfect blend of clinical detachment and professional sympathy. Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, the doctor began delivering the script we had meticulously prepared. I am afraid the news is grim. Your father suffered a catastrophic cardiac event, likely exacerbated by the underlying chemical trauma we previously noted in his blood work. His organs are currently in acute failure. We have him stabilized on life support, but brain activity has plummeted. He has fallen into a deep, unresponsive coma. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Megan. Tyson's voice trembled, putting on his absolute best performance of the grieving son. "Is there any hope for recovery, doctor?" he asked, his tone dripping with fake sorrow. Dr. Arrington sighed heavily. "Barring a medical miracle, no. His body is simply shutting down. He will not make it through the week." I strongly advise you to get his final affairs in order immediately." The doctor offered his condolences and stepped out of the room, leaving me completely alone with the two vultures waiting to pick my bones clean. I felt a bizarre sense of detachment. This was my son, a boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. Now he was standing over my deathbed, eagerly calculating the payout. I focused every ounce of my willpower on keeping my heart rate perfectly steady on the monitor. I could not let a single emotional spike betray my consciousness. The silence in the room lasted for exactly 10 seconds after the heavy door clicked shut. Then the grieving son routine vanished completely. I heard the unmistakable rustle of silk as Megan practically lunged across the room. She stood right next to my bed, so close I could smell the expensive floral perfume she always drenched herself in. She grabbed Tyson by the shoulders. She was not crying. She was laughing. It was a dark, breathless, euphoric sound. "Did you hear that?" she whispered fiercely, her voice vibrating with greedy excitement. "The old fool is practically a corpse. We do not need a psychiatric hold anymore. We do not need his permission." Tyson let out a long, shaky exhale, the relief evident in his heavy breathing. "The legal injunction does not matter if he transfers the asset directly," he muttered. "Call the Apex guys right now," Megan ordered, planting a wet, triumphant kiss on Tyson's cheek right next to my supposedly dying body. "Tell them the legal roadblocks are gone. Bring the final purchase contract into this exact room tonight. The old man is a vegetable. He cannot hold a pen, but he can still sign with a thumbprint." The hospital corridors fell into a heavy, suffocating silence by 2 in the morning. The frantic energy of the daytime shifts had completely evaporated, leaving only the rhythmic, steady beeping of my heart monitor and the quiet hum of the ventilation system. I lay perfectly still, trapped within the artificial coma created by Abernathy's brilliant chemical concoction. My eyes remained sealed shut, but my hearing was hypersensitive, capturing every rustle and breath in the sterile room. I heard the faint swish of the automatic doors sliding open. 3 pairs of footsteps crept into the dimly lit room. I recognized the heavy thud of Tyson's expensive leather shoes and the sharp, aggressive clicking of Megan's heels. The third set of footsteps was sharp and deliberate, belonging to a stranger. It was undoubtedly the corporate lawyer from Apex Development. They moved with the quiet urgency of grave robbers descending upon a fresh tomb. I felt the air shift around my bed as they surrounded me. A faint smell of expensive cologne and stale coffee told me the lawyer was leaning close, inspecting my motionless body to ensure I was truly incapacitated. The trap was set, and the rats had eagerly walked right into the cage. "Let us make this quick," the stranger whispered, his voice slick and devoid of any human empathy. "The nurses rotate every 30 minutes. If they catch us in here with legal documents, it will raise immediate red flags. Hand me his arm." I felt the mattress dip slightly as Tyson leaned over me. He grabbed my right hand. His grip was rough and entirely devoid of any residual filial affection. He lifted my limp arm as if I were nothing more than a mannequin, a lifeless prop in his twisted theater of greed. He pulled a small rectangular object from his pocket. I heard the subtle plastic click of an ink pad flipping open. Tyson grabbed my thumb and aggressively pressed it down into the cold, wet red ink. I focused every ounce of my mental fortitude to keep my breathing shallow and my muscles entirely relaxed. Tyson lifted my stained thumb, hovering it directly over the crisp, heavy parchment paper the lawyer had laid flat across my chest. Tyson let out a low, bitter chuckle. It was a sound stripped of all humanity, completely absent of a son's love. "Look at him," Tyson muttered, his breath hot and reeking of cheap alcohol against my face. A whole life of breaking his back. Decades of sweating in the brutal Georgia sun, fighting for every single dollar, playing the proud, hard-working black man who built his legacy from the dirt. And for what? In the end, every drop of blood he shed, every brick he laid, it all belongs to me anyway. He is finally useful for something. I felt the intense burning urge to open my eyes, grab him by the throat, and strangle the life out of him. But I remained perfectly still, a stone statue absorbing the ultimate betrayal. Megan snickered softly from the foot of the bed, her presence a toxic cloud in the room. "Just press his thumb down, Tyson," she hissed impatiently, tapping her foot against the linoleum floor. "Stop giving a eulogy and secure the money before someone walks in." Tyson drove my thumb down onto the paper, pressing my flesh hard against the document to ensure a perfect, flawless biometric signature. He held it there for 3 agonizing seconds, sealing what he believed was the transfer of my $4 million commercial building to the ruthless executives at Apex Development. He wiped my thumb with a coarse paper towel, leaving a faint red smudge on my skin. They dropped my hand carelessly back onto the hospital blanket, treating me like discarded trash. I kept my eyes tightly shut, but behind my eyelids my mind was blazing with triumphant, righteous fury. They thought they had just secured their golden ticket. They thought they had legally stripped me of my life's work while I lay helpless and dying. What these greedy, arrogant fools did not realize was that the crisp, heavy parchment paper currently resting on my chest was not the Apex purchase agreement. It was a completely different legal instrument. Exactly 1 hour before Tyson and his corporate accomplice snuck into my room, Mr. Cohen had executed a flawless tactical maneuver. My brilliant attorney had arrived at the hospital dressed in the drab gray uniform of a sanitation worker, pushing a squeaky yellow mop bucket. When the Apex lawyer arrived at the hospital lobby, he was forced to stop at the front security desk to sign in as a late-night visitor. He foolishly set his leather briefcase on the counter for less than 20 seconds while fumbling for his identification. That was all Mr. Cohen needed. With the sleight of hand of a seasoned street magician, Cohen had bumped into the lawyer, spilling a tiny amount of soapy water near his expensive Italian shoes. While the lawyer was distracted, cursing and wiping his trousers, Cohen swiftly swapped the specific manila folder protruding from the top of the unzipped briefcase with an identical folder of his own. The document Tyson had just forced my thumb onto was a customized, legally binding affidavit drafted by Cohen himself. It was formatted to look exactly like a standard real estate transfer, right down to the official-looking borders, the identical font size, and the dense legal jargon at the very top of the page. But the actual binding text hidden within the dense paragraphs was entirely different. It was a legally bulletproof declaration stating that Tyson Pierce completely and voluntarily renounced any and all rights to my estate. Finally, a technician in a white coat walked out and handed me a sealed manila envelope. His expression was grim. He quietly advised me to seek immediate medical attention and contact the authorities. My hands shook violently as I tore open the seal. I pulled out the crisp white paper and scanned the bold black text. The results were undeniable. Positive for thallium. The concentration levels were off the charts. The report explicitly stated that continued ingestion would result in total kidney and liver failure within 6 months. The paper slipped from my trembling fingers and fluttered to the cold linoleum floor. I was not dying of old age. I was being murdered. The cruel, agonizing truth crashed down on me, suffocating my denial. The son I had sacrificed my entire life to protect the boy who was meant to inherit my multi-million-dollar legacy was methodically feeding me poison every single morning. I shoved the laboratory report deep into the inner pocket of my jacket. It explicitly transferred total ownership of my commercial building and every single cent of my liquid assets directly to the Lorraine Pierce Memorial Scholarship Fund. Furthermore, it contained a specific clause confirming that this transfer was being executed under my direct wishes. By pressing my thumb to that page, Tyson had not sold my building to Apex. He had unknowingly completely disinherited himself and finalized the exact charitable foundation Megan had been stealing from. He had just signed away his entire future, placing the final lock on my financial vault. The sheer poetic irony of my own son facilitating his complete financial ruin while believing he was robbing me blind brought a profound sense of satisfaction to my racing heart. Blinded by his own breathtaking greed and desperate to escape the intensive care unit before the nursing staff returned, Tyson snatched the document right off my chest. He did not bother to read the fine print. He did not scan the paragraphs to ensure the Apex corporate letterhead was legitimate. He simply blew on the wet red ink to dry it, folded the paper with trembling hands, and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of his jacket. I heard the sharp, frantic tapping of his fingers against the glass screen of his smartphone. The soft glow of the device illuminated the dark room, casting sinister shadows across his face. "Got the fingerprint," Tyson whispered, his voice trembling with euphoric relief. He read the text message out loud to Megan as he typed it, sending it directly to the billionaire CEO of Apex Development. "The ink is drying right now. Prepare the remaining $3.5 million in cash. We are completely done here. Have your board members ready. Friday morning we step into your boardroom and close this deal permanently." The three of them turned and scurried out of the room, their footsteps fading down the sterile corridor, completely unaware they were walking straight into a federal execution. The synthetic compound Abernathy formulated was a masterpiece of chemistry. By 7 o'clock the next morning, its paralyzing grip dissolved entirely, leaving my system without a single trace. I opened my eyes, took a deep breath of sterile hospital air, and pressed the call button. Dr. Arrington rushed in, checking my vitals with a genuine smile of relief before pulling the heavy curtain shut. We had executed the illusion perfectly. An hour later, the heavy door to my room slid open. Tyson and Megan strolled in wearing dark, somber clothing, clearly ready to discuss funeral arrangements and collect their blood money. They stopped dead in their tracks, their faces draining of blood as if they had just walked into a morgue and seen a ghost sit up on the autopsy table. I was propped up against the pillows, calmly eating a cup of cherry gelatin. "Morning sun," I croaked, my voice intentionally raspy. "I feel a bit better today." Tyson gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. His jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. Megan looked like she was going to faint right there on the linoleum, her eyes darting frantically from the heart monitor to my face. They were completely paralyzed by shock. Their perfect murder plan had failed, and their immediate backup plan was now staring them in the face. I did not give them a chance to process the panic. I immediately leaned into my performance, amplifying the facade of a broken, confused old man whose mind was slipping away. I let my spoon clatter against the plastic cup and offered a weak, trembling smile. "I had a terrible dream, Tyson," I whispered, staring blankly at the far wall. "I dreamt I was leaving you with nothing. I feel so weak, my boy. The doctors say my heart is failing. I know my time is coming to an end." Tyson swallowed hard, stepping cautiously toward the bed as if I might suddenly turn into a monster and bite him. "Dad, you had a severe cardiac event," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "You just need to rest. We are taking care of everything." I shook my head slowly, reaching out to grab his hand with a frail grip. "No," I insisted, my voice cracking with fabricated emotion. "I have been too stubborn. I have been holding on to that old building while you have a brilliant tech company to run. You need capital, Tyson. You and Megan need a solid foundation to build your future." I paused, letting the bait dangle right in front of their greedy faces. "I want you to set up a meeting this Friday. Bring those corporate partners you have been talking about. I want to look them in the eye and sign the sale of the building over to them myself. I want to hand you the money while I am still breathing so I can see my son succeed." The sheer whiplash of my statement hit them like a freight train. Tyson exchanged a wild, bewildered look with Megan. They had just spent the entire night forging my thumbprint onto a fake document they thought was a sales contract. Now the man they thought was a vegetable was voluntarily offering to sign the actual paperwork in broad daylight. Their greed instantly overpowered their confusion. They assumed the oxygen deprivation from the heart attack had finally shattered my cognitive reasoning, turning me into a compliant, generous fool. Megan stepped forward, a plastic smile returning to her face. "That is so beautiful, Randall," she purred. "We will arrange everything for Friday." By Thursday afternoon, I convinced Dr. Arrington to discharge me, claiming I wanted to spend my final days in the comfort of my own home. Tyson and Megan eagerly facilitated the release, practically carrying my bags out of the hospital to ensure I was ready for the massive transaction the next morning. They dropped me off at my house and promised to pick me up bright and early on Friday. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, my frail posture vanished. I stood tall, walking briskly to my study where Mr. Cohen and Vaughn were already waiting for me. They were not alone. Sitting in my leather armchairs were two stern-looking men in dark suits. They introduced themselves as Special Agent Miller and Special Agent Vance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI had been building a massive racketeering and extortion case against Apex Development for 3 years, but the billionaire CEO always managed to keep his hands completely clean, insulated by layers of corporate lawyers and shell companies. When Mr. Cohen handed the Bureau the audio recordings of the CEO explicitly threatening my life over a stolen deed, the feds finally had the direct criminal link they needed to tear the entire conglomerate down to its foundations. Friday morning was not just a real estate closing. It was a highly coordinated federal sting operation. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. I did not put on the comfortable sweaters Tyson expected a dying old man to wear. I pulled out my finest tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. This was my armor. I dressed with meticulous care, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I was a man going to war to reclaim his legacy. Agent Miller stepped into the room holding a small metallic device no larger than a grain of rice. He carefully pinned the microscopic transmitter directly under the lapel of my suit jacket. He He ran a nearly invisible wire down the seam, connecting it to a battery pack tucked inside my inner pocket. "This is a secure, encrypted frequency," Mr. Pierce, Agent Miller, explained, testing the audio feed on his earpiece. "We will have a tactical surveillance van parked exactly 2 blocks away from the Apex headquarters. We will hear every single word spoken in that boardroom. Do not provoke them. Just let them hand you the fraudulent contracts and let them talk. We will handle the rest." I adjusted my tie and nodded, my expression hardening into stone. I was ready to burn their empire to the ground. At exactly 9 o'clock, a sleek black luxury sedan pulled into my driveway. Tyson and Megan sat in the front seats, dressed to the nines, practically buzzing with arrogant anticipation. I shuffled out the front door, leaning heavily on my wooden cane, playing the fragile old fool one last time. Tyson opened the rear door for me, displaying a sickening level of fake chivalry. I settled into the leather seat, keeping my hands folded over my cane directly near my lapel. As Tyson merged onto the highway heading toward the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta, Megan glanced at me through the rearview mirror with a look of absolute, unadulterated contempt. She turned her head slightly toward the window, assuming I was too deaf and senile to hear her. She muttered under her breath with a vicious smirk, "Look at this stupid old man. He is practically digging his own grave for us. The second that ink dries, we are transferring every single dime to the offshore account and putting him in the cheapest state-run nursing home we can find." I kept my eyes fixed on the passing city streets, my face completely blank. She had no idea her venomous insults, her blatant admission of financial fraud, and her entire escape plan were being broadcast with crystal-clear digital audio directly into the headsets of federal agents tracking our every move. The elevator doors chimed with a soft metallic ring, opening onto the sprawling 40th floor of the Apex Development headquarters. The entire level was a monument to corporate intimidation, encased in floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass that offered a dizzying panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my breathing to slow down. I could not let them see my panic. The front door handle rattled, followed by the heavy, familiar thud of my son's footsteps echoing in the hallway. I forced my trembling hands to steady, wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, and slumped into my armchair, wearing the mask of a sick, exhausted old man. Tyson walked into the living room holding a brown paper bag filled with expensive organic fruit. Right behind him was Megan, his wife. She wore a pristine white designer dress and a smile so painfully fake it looked painted on her face. For years she had looked at my home as if the very air inside was contaminated. She hated this neighborhood. She hated the worn fabric of my sofa. Today, however, she practically floated into the room, beaming with artificial warmth and a terrifying kind of cheerfulness. "Randall," she chirped, her voice dripping with counterfeit affection. Tyson strode out of the elevator first, adjusting the cuffs of his overly expensive suit with the swagger of a newly minted billionaire. Megan floated right beside him, her chin tilted upward, treating the sleek marble corridor as her personal runway. They moved with an unbearable arrogance, completely intoxicated by the illusion of their impending wealth. I trailed a few steps behind them, dragging the wooden cane across the polished floor, maintaining my fragile facade. A young, sharply dressed assistant guided us through a set of heavy frosted glass double doors and into the primary executive boardroom. The room was freezing, the air conditioning cranked high enough to preserve meat. The center of the room was dominated by a massive rectangular table carved from a single slab of dark mahogany. Tyson pulled out a high-backed leather chair for Megan before taking a seat himself, completely ignoring me as I slowly lowered my allegedly aching body into a chair at the far end of the massive table. Sitting directly across from us were 3 high-ranking executives of Apex Development. They were older white men wearing impeccably tailored suits and matching predatory smiles. At the center sat Richard Vance, the ruthless billionaire CEO whose threatening, gravelly voice I had heard over the phone just days prior. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes, completely devoid of any human empathy, analyzing me not as a person, but as a minor logistical hurdle to be cleared. Vance snapped his fingers, and one of his associates slid a thick, crisp leather portfolio across the smooth mahogany surface. It came to a stop directly in front of Tyson. Tyson eagerly flipped the folder open. Resting on the left side was a towering stack of legal documents riddled with complex transfer clauses and property relinquishment terms. But it was the item on the right side that made Tyson and Megan simultaneously stop breathing. It was a certified cashier check printed on heavy, watermarked bank paper, I could read the bold black numbers from where I sat. $3.5 million. It was the final payout to complete the transaction and secure my legacy for demolition. Tyson's eyes widened with pure, unadulterated greed. He reached out and touched the edge of the check as if ensuring it was not a mirage. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. Megan was practically vibrating in her seat, her manicured fingernails digging into the leather armrests of her chair. Vance leaned forward, resting his elbows on the expensive table and steepling his fingers. "We have expedited the legal underwriting," Mr. Pierce Vance said, his voice slick and coated in artificial politeness. "The initial deposit has already cleared your son's accounts. All the bureaucratic red tape has been effectively eliminated. The city zoning board has approved our demolition permits for your block. All we need is your physical signature on the final transfer deed to execute the release of the remaining funds." Vance slid a heavy gold-plated fountain pen across the table. It rolled smoothly, stopping mere inches from my trembling right hand. "Just pick up the pen." Mr. Pierce Vance urged, his tone shifting from polite to subtly commanding. "Sign on the dotted line and this will all be over. You can go home, rest your tired heart, and let your son manage the family wealth. It is the best thing for everyone involved in this transaction." I stared down at the gold pen, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the building ventilation system. I felt the hidden microphone taped securely against my chest right beneath my lapel. I knew Special Agent Miller and his tactical team were sitting in a surveillance van just 2 blocks away, listening to every single syllable spoken in this room. I looked at the check, then slowly shifted my gaze to Tyson, my own flesh and blood. The boy I had worked 14-hour shifts in the blistering Georgia heat to feed and clothe. He was staring at the pen, silently begging me to sign away my life so he could pay off his gambling debts and continue funding a hollow, fraudulent lifestyle. Beside him, Megan was practically salivating, her eyes locked onto the 7-figure sum like a starving animal staring at fresh meat. She had tried to poison me. She had paid a corrupt doctor to declare me insane. She had dragged my name through the mud, and she felt absolutely zero remorse. Then I looked at Richard Vance and his 2 silent corporate attack dogs. These were the men who had systematically destroyed historic neighborhoods, pricing out hardworking families and replacing vibrant communities with sterile concrete shopping centers. They had threatened to end my life if I did not surrender my property. They thought they could simply buy my legacy with blood money and terror tactics. They looked at me and saw nothing but a broken, desperate old black man who had finally been defeated by illness and intimidation. I placed my hands flat on the cold mahogany table. I gripped the curved handle of my wooden cane and slowly pushed myself up from the leather chair. Tyson leaned forward, his face twisting into a mask of eager impatience. "Come on, Dad," he whispered, his voice tight and strained. "Just grab the pen. Do it. Let us finish this right now so we can take you home." I stood there for a long moment, holding the heavy silence like a weapon. The tremor in my hands completely stopped. The slump in my shoulders vanished entirely. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, filling my lungs and expanding my chest. The frail, dying old man facade dissolved, instantly replaced by the hardened, resolute businessman who had survived 4 decades in the most cutthroat real estate market in the South. I did not reach for the gold pen. I did not look at the fraudulent contract. Instead, I locked eyes with Richard Vance, staring directly into his cold, dead pupils with a fiery intensity that made his smug, arrogant smile falter for a fraction of a second. I opened my fingers and let go of the wooden cane. It fell freely, hitting the polished marble floor with a sharp, violent crack that echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous boardroom. Tyson flinched violently in his seat, his eyes darting from the fallen cane to my perfectly steady hands. Megan gasped, clutching the edge of the table as confusion washed over her face. My back was perfectly straight, my posture rigid and unyielding. The silence was deafening. I looked directly at Vance, projecting my voice so it carried with booming, absolute authority. "Everything will indeed end right now," I declared, my words sharp and cutting through the frozen air like a blade. "The lies, the theft, the extortion, and the systematic destruction of my community, it all ends in this exact room today." Vance frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion and rising anger. "What the hell are you talking about?" Old man Vance growled, slamming his fist onto the table. "Sit down and sign the damn paper before I lose my patience." I offered a cold, razor-sharp smile that sent a visible shiver down my son's spine. "Oh, there will be signatures today," I replied, my voice echoing with righteous thunder. But the one signing is not me. It is a federal arrest warrant. Richard Vance stared at me for a split second before erupting into a cruel, booming laugh. His two corporate cronies joined in their chuckles, echoing off the reinforced glass walls of the high-rise. They genuinely thought it was a joke. They looked at me as if I were a pathetic broken animal making a desperate final stand before being put out of my misery. To them, I was just a senile old man whose brain had finally completely fractured under the weight of illness and intimidation. Tyson, however, did not laugh. He slammed his hands onto the expensive mahogany table, his face flushing with a sudden panicked rage. He leaped out of his leather chair, pointing a violently trembling finger directly at my face. "He is completely out of his mind," Tyson shouted, his voice cracking with shrill desperation. The oxygen deprivation from the heart attack destroyed his brain. "Someone call building security right now. Get the armed guards in here and drag him out of this building. He is having a severe psychotic episode." Megan aggressively grabbed her designer purse, stepping back from the table as if my sudden mental clarity was a contagious airborne disease. "This is an absolute disaster," she hissed, glaring at Vance. "Do not just sit there. Call your guards and physically force his thumb onto the paper again. He does not know what he is saying. The ink is right there. Just make him do it." But I did not shrink back into my chair. I did not cower from my son's pathetic shouting. I maintained absolute eye contact with the billionaire CEO. With a slow, deliberate motion, I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I pulled out a sleek silver USB drive, holding it up so the overhead fluorescent lights caught the metal. There was a state-of-the-art presentation console built directly into the center of the massive mahogany table. I stepped forward, ignoring the frantic demands of my son, and jammed the flash drive directly into the primary media port. "We brought you some fresh groceries. We were just so worried about your health. We wanted to make sure you were starting your day right." I looked at the two of them, my own son and the woman who pulled his strings. They stood there perfectly groomed, playing the role of devoted children while a deadly toxin sat right on my kitchen counter. I forced my mouth into a weak, appreciative smile, masking the absolute fury boiling in my veins. "Let me make you a fresh cup of that special tea we bought you," Megan offered, already walking toward my kitchen without waiting for my answer. That simple sentence felt like a gunshot to my chest. Megan had never so much as touched a spoon in my house. Since the day Tyson married her, she had made her disdain for my working-class roots abundantly clear. She refused to eat my cooking, complained about the area, and always insisted Tyson meet her at expensive restaurants rather than sit at my dining table. With a single confident tap on the digital touchscreen, I bypassed their corporate network security and mirrored the drive directly onto the massive 100-inch high-definition monitor covering the entire back wall of the executive boardroom. The arrogant laughter in the room died instantly. The giant screen flickered to life, bathing the room in a harsh, bright glow. The very first image was the undeniable digitized laboratory report from the independent toxicologist. The bold red letters spelling out lethal concentrations of thallium glared down at them like a death sentence. Then the screen shifted. Crystal clear hidden camera footage from my living room began to play. It was the night of my birthday party. The high-definition video showed Megan standing over my kitchen counter, producing the plastic syringe from her pocket and injecting the clear synthetic cardiac compound directly into my slice of chocolate raspberry cake. Her voice, recorded via the hidden audio bugs, filled the freezing boardroom loud and crisp. "The poison tea is moving way too slow," she hissed from the massive surround sound speakers. "We inject him during the celebration." Tyson stumbled backward, his knees hitting his leather chair with a dull thud. The color drained entirely from his face as a new audio file began to play. It was his own voice, recorded during a frantic phone call to his loan sharks, confirming he had successfully pried open my wall safe and stolen the original physical deed to my commercial property. Then came the final piece of the presentation. A meticulous, complex web of digital wire transfers, forged signatures, and offshore accounts compiled by my bank and Mr. Cohen. It explicitly detailed how Richard Vance and Apex Development deliberately engaged in predatory extortion, money laundering, and the knowing purchase of stolen assets utilizing entirely fraudulent medical documents. The screen displayed exact transaction records linking the $500,000 deposit directly to a known criminal syndicate account used to pay off Tyson's underground gambling debts. The temperature in the executive boardroom seemed to drop below freezing. The air was sucked completely out of the room, leaving a suffocating, heavy vacuum of absolute terror. The sheer magnitude of the digital evidence playing on a continuous loop above our heads was completely undeniable. It was a flawless, bulletproof federal indictment broadcast in stunning high definition. The smug, predatory smiles had vanished entirely from the faces of the apex executives. The two associates sitting next to Richard Vance looked as if they were about to be physically sick. They pushed their heavy chairs away from the table, staring at the glowing screen in pure, unadulterated horror. They knew their multi-billion-dollar careers, their massive bank accounts, and their freedom were evaporating right before their eyes. Vance was no longer the imposing, untouchable billionaire who had threatened my life over a restricted phone line. His arrogant posture collapsed. His face turned an ashen, sickly gray. He looked from the terrifying screen to me, and then to the glass walls of his fortress, realizing his immense wealth could not buy him out of a direct federal extortion and money laundering conspiracy captured on tape. Without saying a single word, Vance scrambled out of his chair. He bolted toward the heavy frosted glass double doors leading to the executive elevators, acting purely on the primal, animalistic instinct to flee. Tyson was completely paralyzed. His entire body trembled violently. He looked down at his shaking hands and then up at me, his eyes wide with a horrific dawning realization. All the blood rushed from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified little boy caught in a nightmare of his own making. "Dad," he stammered, his voice a pathetic broken whisper echoing in the quiet room. "Dad, please listen to me. I did not know she was going to use a syringe. I did not want to kill you. I swear I did not want you dead. I just needed the money so they would not break my legs." Megan spun around to face him, her perfectly manicured facade shattering into raw, ugly panic. "Shut your mouth, you absolute idiot!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger at his chest. "Do not say another word. They are recording us. You are giving them a confession." But it was far too late for silence. Every admission, every desperate plea was currently feeding directly through the microscopic transmitter pinned beneath my lapel, straight into the ears of the federal agents waiting below. Vance threw his heavy body against the boardroom doors, desperately trying to pry them open to make his escape to his private helicopter pad. He never got the chance. A deafening, violent crash erupted through the 40th floor. The heavy, solid oak and frosted glass doors were kicked open with such ferocious kinetic force that the glass panes completely shattered, raining sharp fragments across the expensive marble floor. A tactical team of heavily armed federal agents flooded into the executive boardroom. They moved with terrifying speed and synchronized precision, dressed in full tactical gear with heavy Kevlar vests bearing the bold yellow letters of the FBI. The blinding red beams of their laser sights swept rapidly across the room, cutting through the cold air and locking directly onto the chests and foreheads of everyone standing near the mahogany table. FBI elite agent roared, his voice booming over the chaos and completely drowning out the video still playing on the massive screen. "Nobody move a single muscle. Put your hands in the air right now." The chaotic symphony of heavily armed federal agents flooding the boardroom was instantly punctuated by the sharp, cold click of heavy steel handcuffs. Special Agent Miller and his tactical team moved with a practiced, aggressive efficiency that left absolutely zero room for negotiation. They slammed Richard Vance and his two trembling corporate associates against the reinforced glass walls, violently kicking their legs apart and securing their wrists behind their backs. The billionaire CEO, who had just threatened my life with supreme arrogance, was now pressed awkwardly against the glass, a whimpering mess of bespoke tailoring and sheer panic. In the center of the room, the fantasy world. Tyson and Megan had meticulously constructed out of lies and synthetic poison, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The $3.5 million cashier check still rested on the mahogany table, a mocking testament to their failed greed. Tyson fell to his knees before an agent even touched him, his expensive suit wrinkling against the marble floor. The illusion of the triumphant tech CEO, the wealthy heir, the unstoppable power couple evaporated in less than 30 seconds. They were no longer the masterminds of a multi-million-dollar real estate heist. They were just two desperate criminals caught completely red-handed under the harsh fluorescent lights of federal justice. As an agent grabbed Megan by the arms and roughly forced her wrists together, her pristine facade completely disintegrated. The polished, sophisticated woman who had looked down on my neighborhood and mocked my working-class roots revealed the ugly, terrified animal hiding just beneath her expensive skin. The reality of a federal prison sentence crashed over her, wiping away any trace of loyalty or marital devotion. She thrashed against the agent securing her handcuffs, her manicured nails scraping uselessly against his tactical vest. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, deafening wail. "I am a victim here. I did not do anything. It was all him." She violently twisted her head to glare at Tyson, who was kneeling on the floor in a state of catatonic shock. Her eyes burned with a venomous, selfish desperation. She was fully prepared to throw her own husband to the wolves to save her own skin. "He is a degenerate gambling addict," she screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling bound finger at my son. "He owed $300,000 to violent loan sharks. They were going to kill him. He begged me to help him. He forced me to buy that chemical compound online. He forced me to put it in the birthday cake. I did not want to hurt anyone. He made me do it. I swear to God I knew nothing about his plans to steal the deed. He manipulated me." She sobbed wildly, attempting to play the role of the terrified, manipulated housewife. She completely ignored the fact that her own voice had just echoed through the boardroom demanding that I be injected with poison. The sheer hypocrisy of her performance was staggering. She sobbed and pleaded with the federal agents, offering to testify against her husband, offering to hand over bank records, offering absolutely anything to avoid stepping into a prison cell. Her words were a frantic, pathetic torrent of betrayal. She stripped Tyson of his dignity, exposing his deepest failures and criminal debts to a room full of federal agents and corporate strangers.